Chapter 181, Earl of Quinn. After the report, Arthur stared at the map before him. The force gathered at Eagle's Nest Keep was already more than enough to crush Old Hill, but he refused to act rashly. He hadn't come merely to play the part of a barbarian raider, win a skirmish or two, and torch a few hamlets. His goal was Echoing Ring City, the Rookton seat, to take it and use it as a base to push the flames of war into the heart of the Riverlands, to answer House Redwine's burning of Peach Garden and avenge the slaughtered people. That was why he had stationed himself in Starfall City earlier, shoring up its defenses and securing Braemont in the north, the Torrent River, and the coast, so the Riverlands would be unable to strike back at Starfall while he moved. He lifted his gaze from the map and gave orders to the 3 tribal leaders. For the next 3 days, step up raids on Duskhold Stronghold and Freedom Mountain. Withdraw all raids on Delling's Stronghold. The main force of the Rooktons is those 200 light cavalry. I want Sharpwing to track their patterns and finding routes when they go to support Duskhold and Freedom. Find their weaknesses. Yes, my lord, the leaders replied. We'll keep the beacons at Duskhold and Freedom Mountain burning day and night. Over the following days, Arthur used Sharpwing's high-altitude reconnaissance to study Old Hill's entire defensive layout and troop deployments. It was harvest season in the Riverlands. Aside from those 200 cavalry, most garrisons were light. Only Delling's Stronghold had more than 200 soldiers. The other 2 castles held maybe 100 each, with scattered detachments in outposts and mountain villages. Sharpwing revealed no secret passes through the Red Mountains into Old Hill's territory. But the 200 horsemen provided a crucial discovery. They were commanded personally by Earl Quinn Rookton. Confident in his forward posts, or eager to render aid, Quinn rarely sent scouts to screen his marches. Their route was fixed, almost never varied. Arthur smiled grimly. High-altitude reconnaissance, mountain legion, southern barbarian invasion, and the wait for the enemy to tire tactic. The last, he knew, paid off. Within 7 days, his men could move and hide more convincingly for an ambush, and morale would soar after a successful strike. He picked a picturesque, hilly wood called Gambler's Grove as the cavalry's tomb. Delling's Stronghold to the southwest, a tavern on Cobblestone Path. This was where the Rookton cavalry camped. Earl Quinn Rookton sat at a corner of that tavern and drank a glass of sweet wine without much appetite. Ever since his loss to the 100 Flowers Knight in the Starfall tournament, he felt abandoned by the 7 gods. It had taken more than a month to heal and accept being bested by an upstart knight. In fairness, the 100 Flowers Knight had also been defeated by the Sword of the Morning. Losing to him wasn't a blight on Quinn's honor. Still, the defeat stung. Just as he was recovering, a letter from Starfall arrived, a long, furious account accusing House Redwine of atrocities. Quinn glanced at it a few times and then tossed it into the hearth and watched it burn. He didn't know how much of it was true, but it was obvious to anyone that Arbor and Starfall were on the brink of a serious conflict. What did that have to do with him? The Rooktons served House Tyrell. They could afford to be spectators. At most, they might write a courteous word to support Redwine, another Riverlands house. Then the situation shifted. Vassals near the Red Mountains reported almost at once that groups of barbarians were attacking outposts and villages. At first, Quinn took it for seasonal raiding. Barbarians coming down for a fall foray happened almost every year, worse some seasons than others. A few years back, there had even been talk of a Vulture King, though that menace had aimed at the Torrent River, not their side. He ordered the usual measures: sharpen vigilance, muster local soldiers to man the watchtowers, and keep the beacon network ready. He thought that would be the end of it. But reports kept coming. Villages burned, outposts destroyed. Refugees arrived sobbing, repeating what the invaders had told them. They were avenging House Redwine's crimes: piracy, slaughter of old people and children, killing those who surrendered. Quinn felt the ground shift under him. Damn it, what did the quarrel between Redwine and Starfall have to do with Rookton or Old Hill? Still, he knew the danger of inaction. A lord who hid behind his walls while his lands were ravaged would lose prestige. Vassals and commons would cease to respect him, and enemies would mark him as weak and press further. So he wrote to Highgarden to report the raids and began recruiting. He gathered guards, local knights, and hired men-at-arms, forming a 200-strong cavalry force. He led ostentatious patrols, moving from place to place to show his people that their lord answered their pleas and to reassure those along his routes that Rookton protection rode with them. He also took his heir, Meredith Rookton, on every relief mission to teach him what rule demanded. "Father, this is the third time we've reinforced Duskhold this week," Meredith said, wiping sweat from his brow, his young face drawn with fatigue. "Those barbarians slip away like mountain rats." Quinn steadied his son with a tired smile. "It's worth it," Highgarden replied. He paused, then added, "Lady Olenna told us not to worry too much about Starfall staging a large-scale massacre disguised as barbarians. She has intelligence suggesting Starfall fears an invasion by Arbor and is strengthening its own defenses. And she promised House Redwine would send a consignment of discounted Arbor wine to make up for our losses." A brief, bright hope flashed across Meredith's face. "So we don't have to keep riding back and forth?" "No." Quinn's voice was firm despite his wariness. "We must let our people see our banners and let our enemies hear our horses. That is the best defense." Chapter 182, Bleeding. The assembly horns cut through the pre-dawn stillness of the Rookton camp. Men cursed and shuffled awake. "Why so early? Don't those wildlings need their sleep?" one muttered. "May the others take those wildlings," another grumbled. "Damn it! Bring me my chainmail," someone else barked. Sleep-heavy hired knights and mercenaries pulled on armor and emerged from the inn and their tents. Quinn Rookton was already awake. His squire helped him into his hauberk, and he rode out to the muster ground. Meredith, who had been nagging him the day before, was already in the saddle, organizing the ranks and counting men. Quinn's chest eased at the sight of his son issuing orders. "Father, everyone has assembled," Meredith reported as he rode up, "except those still convalescing." Quinn nodded, swung into the saddle, and signaled the line to move. "Follow me. To Duskhold's stronghold." The beacon on Duskhold had been lit. Quinn led the standard-bearer, and Meredith, with more than 200 Riverlands cavalry trailing behind. "You did well this morning," Quinn said as they spurred forward. "You'll make a fine lord of Old Hill one day," Meredith replied, helmet tipped up at the brow. He rode with an arrogance Quinn had seen before. "I only do as you taught me," he added. "I learned slowly, but I'm not a fool." Meredith pushed for speed. "If we reach Duskhold fast enough, maybe the wildlings won't have time to retreat. We can kill a few and put their heads on pikes above the gate, give them a reason to think twice next time." Quinn said nothing and urged his horse forward. The road grew rough and narrow as they entered Gambler's Woods. Rocky outcrops and close woods slowed their pace. Quinn reined in now and then to give the horses a breather. He had to save strength for the final charge. He shot Meredith a warning over his shoulder. "When we fight, stay close behind me. Don't break ranks and chase off alone like last time. It's dangerous." Meredith waved off the caution. "I know, Father." A whistle cut the air. Meredith's grin froze. Horror opened in his eyes. A short spear, hurled from the trees at the right, slammed into his neck. "No!" Quinn's cry tore out. He felt the impact of heavy blows to his chest and waist. His mount screamed and stumbled. Quinn vaulted free as the horse collapsed and hit the packed earth. "Enemy attack! Enemy attack!" someone shouted. The standard-bearer on Quinn's left had dodged a storm of javelins and roared, "On the right slope! Those bastards are in the trees! Protect the Lord!" Quinn looked up. Figures in dark green armor flowed out of the forest like a tide of ghosts. These were no hillmen. They were the Mountain Legion, the soldiery of Starfall City. Quinn's heart fell. He had seen them once at a tourney. Their vine-etched armor was worth a fortune in the Smith's Quarter. "Blood for blood," their captains yelled. "Surrender or die." Quinn swallowed despair, picked up his shield, drew his sword, and bellowed, "Don't break! Follow me and kill the enemy!" He charged. A brown-eyed soldier met him. Their blades rang and recoiled. Quinn feinted, then snapped his boot into the man's groin. The soldier howled and dropped his shield. Quinn seized the moment and drove his blade into the weak gap beneath the man's jaw. The tip slid home. The soldier pitched forward. Quinn paid for that thrust with a shoulder blow that shattered his shield, but he fought on and took down 3 more of the Mountain Legion who converged on him. He dragged his blade free from the last throat and, breathing hard, realized the battlefield had gone quiet around him. He steadied himself on his sword, his left arm hung numb. All around him, the Mountain Legion formed a ring. On the ground were bodies and kneeling mercenaries begging for mercy. The Rookton banner, the gold-chained cross on sky blue, had been cut down and trampled. The standard-bearer lay dead. The ring split. Through the parting soldiers strode a single man in blood-red armor, his blade as long as a man's height and streaked with gore. Quinn recognized him instantly. Arthur Snow, the Sword of the Morning. Once he had seemed an impeccable figure at tourneys, now the Crimson Man was a grim and terrible shape. Quinn's mind spun. Why was Arthur here? Hadn't Lady Olenna written that Earl Paxton's Arbor fleet had tied up Starfall's main host at the Torrent River? He had thought the Mountain Legion occupied elsewhere. Arthur stopped a few paces away and lifted his sword. "Surrender, Earl Quinn," he said. "I will give you the courtesies of a prisoner." Quinn's fingers tightened on his hilt. "Fight," he answered, then let out a laugh full of salt and grief when he saw the length of Arthur's blade. Rookton had once owned a Valyrian sword called Orphan Maker. It had been lost long ago. He ground his teeth. "Dying in battle inspires respect," Arthur continued, flicking blood from the blade. "But to die defending the Red Wine's crimes is meaningless." "Red Wine?" Quinn spat. Rage flared, raw and sudden. "Damn the Red Wines. I fight to protect my people, my lands." Arthur removed his helmet, hair matted with sweat and blood. "I do not intend to wrong your people, Earl Quinn. Surrender. Have your men cease resistance. Hand over Mingwan City as my base, and I will restrain my men from harming your people. At the end of the war, Mingwan will be returned to you." Quinn looked over at Meredith. The boy lay motionless, a dark stain spreading over his breast. Quinn's throat closed. "Return Mingwan City?" he said, voice raw. "My eldest son, my heir, was killed with your spear before my eyes." Arthur's face did not change. "War takes no account of fair wishes. If not for the Red Wines, I would not have crossed the Red Mountains." Arthur pulled his helm back on and set Dawn, his family's ancestral greatsword, into a stance that made it look like a second man's body. "So, Earl Quinn," he said slowly, "will you die for Red Wine's crimes or surrender and live to see them pay?" The choice hung between them like a blade. Arthur's voice hardened. "Choose." Chapter 183. Dielenberg Earl Quinn chose silence between life and death. Arthur did not kill him. He was more useful alive. After a quick cleanup of the battlefield, the Mountain Legion, despite losing more than 20 men, routed the Rookton family's elite cavalry, capturing 60 war horses and as many prisoners. Arthur ordered, "Send word, bring Earl Quinn and the prisoners, and prepare the army to march on Durlenburg." Durlenburg lay between the Red Mountains and the Pebble Path, the main road to Mingwan City. It was a fortress that had to be taken, both to secure supply lines and to ensure a possible withdrawal from the Riverlands. In Arthur's eyes, it was even more important than Mingwan City. The messenger wasted no time and carried the order through the ranks. Arthur turned to Penrose, who stood pale and shaking. "Release the Raven. Tell Jello and Jimmy to lead their troops to rendezvous with me at Durlenburg as planned. Tell the 3 tribal chiefs to cease their harassment and bring their armies to the same rendezvous." Penrose fumbled, then released the Raven. The Mountain Legion, long trained and disciplined, moved quickly toward Durlenburg. From the slope where the castle was built, the garrison already had them in sight. Heads bobbed on the battlements, spears and eyes ready. "My lord, this castle is not easy to take," Xiong Di reported, scanning the walls. "A direct assault will need catapults and ladders. They have plenty of men. Durlenburg is a hard nut to crack." Arthur, mounted on a captured horse, shook his head. "Prisoners are more useful than catapults. Set up camp and wait for the forces from Eagle's Nest Keep to rendezvous with us." He had no intention of storming the fortress. With Quinn in his custody, things would be simpler. Even if Quinn refused to open the gates, Arthur had other ways to make them yield. The Mountain Legion made camp on the south side of the Pebble Path near a stream and sent a detachment to the abandoned Rookton encampment to recover supplies and horses. That night, 2 contingents arrived, 500 men from Starfall City who had marched up the Pebble Path from Eagle's Nest Keep, and 400 wildlings forming a free legion. From inside his guard tent, Quinn watched the stream of troops with an ashen face. He remembered the letter from Highgarden Had the Arbor fleet tied up Starfall City's main forces? He had burned a letter accusing the Redwynes of atrocities, taking Lady Olenna's word over Starfall's. Now, seeing these men appear so quickly, a doubt gnawed at him. If Starfall's main force were really tied up, how did 500 men appear here overnight unless they were already in the Red Mountains? The Starfall letter suddenly looked more credible than the one he'd trusted. Inside Arthur's main tent, the wildling chief sat tense. "My lord, Deer Strength and the others are still far off. It will take time. These 400 are all I could muster from my tribe." "Don't be nervous. I'm only confirming numbers to plan the next moves," Arthur said, waving a hand. "Chief, have some soup. Eat something." Jimmy clicked his tongue. "My lord, we captured the Old Hill Earl before the fighting even began." He trailed off, surprised. He had seen Quinn at a tourney once. After winning the archery, the Earl had even offered Jimmy a place in his service. He had never expected to see him captured so quickly. "This is only the beginning," Arthur said, sipping the milky white fish soup. "Taking one Riverlands Earl is not my aim." "We sent that letter accusing the Redwynes," Jello said as he drank unsweetened lemonade. "We cannot start strong and finish weak. We crossed the Red Mountains and came thousands of miles. If we don't give the Riverlands people a reason to hate the Redwynes for provoking us, it'll all be for nothing." Crowfood, the wildling chief, watched the confident men at the table and drank his soup in silence. He was quietly relieved that he hadn't been swayed by Chion and had instead thrown in with Starfall City. They discussed ways to take Durlinburg and Mingwan City. Ideas came up: build siege engines, mount night raids to slip through the gates. But Arthur listened and assigned tasks. Jimmy would oversee siege construction, Jello would organize the night raids, Crowfood would handle scouting and intelligence, and Xiong Di would secure the camp. The next morning, Arthur rode toward Durlinburg with 7 cavalrymen and Earl Quinn under a white flag. After announcing their purpose and displaying Quinn as captive, 7 knights emerged from a side gate of the castle. The standard-bearers exchanged names in the usual formal way. "Have your men lay down their weapons and come out," Arthur called. "I will guarantee the safety of all who surrender. You should know we are not like the Redwynes. We do not slaughter those who yield, nor the old, women, or children." Sir Folk, Lord of Durlinburg, wore a sullen face. He had been suspicious when strange troops gathered the day before, and now his liege lord's capture meant his 200 cavalry were likely finished. "Sir Arthur Snow," he said, "you are not my liege. You have no right to order me to disarm." He glanced at Quinn, and seeing him remain silent, felt steadier. "Release my lord and take your men back to Starfall City. If you would take my castle, be prepared to lose 10 men for every one of ours." "I came to seek justice for those of Starfall City who were killed and for what was stolen from them," Arthur replied. "Then go to Arbor and find Earl Paxton Redwyne, not here," Sir Folk said. "We do not seek conflict with you." "You may believe the Arbor fleet is beyond reach," Arthur said with a smile. "But here's a different proposal. I want the castle behind you, and you want your liege freed and for us to leave. Since that is the case, I suggest a duel, one-on-one, under the witness of the 7 gods. The loser will accept the winner's terms." Folk's 7 men exchanged looks and fell silent. The name and deeds of the Sword of the Morning carried weight. Arthur's gaze was contemptuous. "If your cause is just, the 7 will stand with you. Or perhaps the Riverlands honor you boast of is empty words like the Redwynes." Folk and his men bristled. The burly knight behind them flushed and could not help himself. "I will accept," he declared. "I will prove the honor of the Riverlands with my sword. The 7 gods will stand with us." Chapter 184, March into Mingwan City. Sir Foke hesitated under his companion's urging, eyes weighing the choices. Durlinburg sat at a strategic choke point, a key stronghold for the Red Mountains and the obvious target whenever wildling forces pressed south. From Sir Arthur's demeanor, the Sword of the Morning, it was plain he meant to strike at the heart of the Riverlands. Durlinburg, sitting squarely in their line of retreat, had to be taken. Refuse, and Starfall's army would concentrate on him first. Help from Mingwan would take too long to arrive. Understanding the stakes, Sir Folk let out a slow breath. "Sir Arthur," he said finally, "I hope you'll keep your word. If I lose, Release my lord and withdraw your army back to Starfall. If a single combat could spare the castle a siege, preserve honor, and limit bloodshed, it was the sensible choice. If he won, the prestige would be great. Arthur relaxed at the concession. Much of the decision came from his reputation. As the Sword of the Morning, he had cultivated a reputation for mercy to those who yielded, sparing the surrendering, the old, women, and children. If we win, I'll treat your men well, Arthur promised. Swear on the Seven not to take up arms against me, and I'll grant you certain freedoms. The duel was set in a clearing before Durlenburg. The castle's soldiers crowded the battlements to watch. The Septon swung a censer and intoned vows, calling the seven gods to witness and judge. Arthur stood at one side of the field with two swords, composed if slightly impatient. His opponent was a burly knight, a champion of couched lances whose unbeaten record at the tilt had made him eager to settle the matter on foot. Stripped of his horse, the challenger thought he had the advantage, but with both of his feet on the ground and two blades in hand, Arthur's skill left no surprise. After a brief, furious exchange, the burly knight lay still. Arthur wiped blood from his blade and said coldly, "Bury him well." "Sir Folk, have your men lay down their arms and come out," he ordered. Sir Folk signaled the men behind him. Soon Durlenburg's gates opened, and the garrison filed out in formation, surrendering their weapons and armor. Arthur, pleased at the quick capitulation, nodded. "You did well." "I did what I must, my lord," Sir Folk answered, shaking his head. "Redwine's outrages are not ours, yet we pay. Were you a wildling chieftain, vulture king or no, I would have fought to the last for my lord." With Durlenburg secured, supply lines and retreat routes safe, Arthur left 100 men to garrison the castle and led the main host rapidly west along the pebble path toward Mingwan city. Mingwan lay hemmed by two streams to the north and south and protected by a broad moat. Manors and farms clustered along the water, and the Rookton family had long controlled Old Hill from the castle there. Inside Mingwan's audience hall, Lady Ayanna, wife of Earl Quinn, sat pale on the lord's seat. News from the returning cavalry had been grim. The scouting party had been ambushed. Her eldest son was dead, and her husband's fate was unknown. Were we set upon by wildlings from the Red Mountains, or Starfall's men? She demanded, voice tight. 3 cavalrymen below the dais looked as if they had seen a funeral. One spoke with a trembling voice. Their gear was fine, well made. I struck an enemy's breastplate with my longsword, and it just bounced. Another added, their leader bore 2 swords. One was a great sword I'd never seen, its blade pale, like glass. It seemed to glow. The captain of the guard answered, grim. That sword is Dawn, the ancestral blade of House Dane, now wielded by the Sword of the Morning, Sir Arthur Snow. Folks say he prefers 2 swords to a shield. At that moment, Maester Hicks hurried in with a letter. From Durlenburg, my lady. They reported yesterday that a large host came down from the Red Mountains into Old Hill, well over 1,000. Ayanna's sight swam. She thought of the earlier, happier letter from Highgarden, the one that had boasted of arbor wine selling well, and the fortunate rise in prices after a peach orchard burned, news meant to make their losses bearable. Instead, here was ruin, a scouting force cut to pieces, her son dead, and her husband missing. When the 3 cavalrymen had left, the room settling into a stifled hush, Lady Ayanna forced herself to speak. Maester Hicks, Captain, Old Hill stands at a crossroads. What do you advise? We must raise the levies and call on our vassals at once, the captain said. If Durlenburg holds, the enemy cannot push deep into Old Hill. That's prudent, Maester Hicks agreed, and we must send word to our liege. Let the Highgarden lords know Starfall's main force is here. We should urge Earl Paxton Redwine to move the Arbor fleet up the Torrent River to strike at Starfall City itself, force them to withdraw. Lady Ayanna's shoulders eased a little at the sound counsel. Do it. Write to Highgarden and the Arbor at once. Tell them everything. She turned to the captain. Raise the levy in every village and town. Tell the people that, harvest or not, if the enemy comes, their grain and homes will be taken and burned. Muster the city watch and send a party along the back road to aid Durlenburg. And send an envoy to the Starfall camp to learn if my lord is alive. As you command, my lady, the captain and maester said, bowing. As the hall emptied and her orders were set in motion, Lady Ayanna wiped the tears she could not show. She called to her handmaidens, voice brittle but resolute. "Bring all my children to the sept. We will pray for Quinn and for the men in Durlenburg. Let the seven watch over them and give them courage." Chapter 185, Siege of Mingwan City. Early autumn made the Riverlands breathtaking. Arthur reined in his warhorse halfway up a hill on the pebble path. A thin morning mist hugged the valley. Sunlight pierced the haze, casting mottled gold through the oaks and elms. A winding stream glinted silver through the green, like a chain in an emerald field. "The north can freeze a man's nose, and Dorne's sun can cook an egg," Arthur said, removing his iron gauntlet to catch a drifting maple leaf. "But here, the gods truly favor the Riverlands." Jello rode up beside him, a grin on his handsome face. "No wonder the Riverland lords are all so well fed and fat. Even their armor has to be gilded." Arthur chuckled and looked at the prisoner being escorted by two soldiers. Quinn Rookton was a study in contrast to the tranquil scene. The Earl of Old Hill's clothes were caked with mud, his once neat brown beard tangled and wild. "Sir Quinn, have you thought it over?" Arthur asked, casually tossing the leaf toward the stream and watching it spin away in the current. "If you persuade Mingwan City to surrender, swear, like Durlenburg, never to oppose me and pay a sum of grain." He paused, nudged his horse with his iron boot so it turned toward the prisoner. "I'll restrain my men from looting the villages and burning your fields." Quinn looked up. A shaft of sunlight cut across his pale face. He didn't answer at once, only stared toward the faint towers of Mingwan City on the ridge, his Adam's apple bobbing. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. "I am your prisoner, Sir Arthur, not your vassal. I will not obey your commands." Jello's hand went to his sword, but Arthur merely shrugged. Since the ambush in Gambler's Forest 2 weeks ago, where Arthur had taken Quinn and killed his son and heir, Quinn had held the same uncooperative, listless bearing, as if life had been stripped from him. "As you wish," Arthur said, slipping his gauntlet back on. The leather creaked as it tightened. "But when your people wail in the flames, remember this was your choice." He snapped the reins. The warhorse reared, flinging mud onto Quinn's boots. "Forward, make camp before sundown." The column moved on. The clatter of iron hooves through the woods startled a flock of birds into the sky. Arthur watched them until a familiar shadow swept down, his falcon, Sharpwing. The bird landed on his raised arm, talons clenching the leather bracer. "Let's see what kind of welcome our enemies have prepared," Arthur said, stroking the falcon's feathers. He lifted his hand and released it. Sharpwing cried aloud, beat the air, and rose until it was a black speck against the blue. As the western clouds bled red with the setting sun, Mingwan City came into view. Torches along the walls lit one by one, a fiery snake coiled on a hillside. Arthur ordered camp set and closed his eyes to share the falcon's sight. From Sharpwing's high vantage, the city's defenses were laid bare. Patrols on the walls were thin, fewer than 200 poorly equipped conscripts trained in the square, and several craftsmen hurriedly repaired the gates. No other noble banners flew, only the Roxton blue and gold ring above the keep. Arthur realized the city's levies and vassals had not yet gathered. Mingwan's forces were weaker even than Durlenburg's. He did not rush to assault. Instead, he told Jello to pitch camps to the east and west, to surround the city and build siege engines. He handed the captured horses to his wildling cavalry and let them ride out to plunder, proclaiming their raid's vengeance for the Derwin family's atrocities. For 7 days, the villages around Mingwan felt the war's teeth. Arthur's wildling horsemen swept the countryside like a pestilence, emptying granaries, hanging farmers who resisted from roadside oaks. Every night, an orange skyline burned. Smoke hung in the mornings. Arthur led his elite mountain legion in the field, meeting reinforcements head-on with the aid of Sharpwing's reconnaissance. Most of the hastily raised levies lacked seasoned commanders. Farmers armed with pitchforks and sickles could not stand when armored mountain legion soldiers burst from the woods. Arthur rarely needed tricks. A volley of short spears would break them, and a follow-up charge sent the rest to their knees, pleading or fleeing. After a week of besieging and cutting off reinforcements, relief finally arrived. Men from Starfall City and wildling levies from the Red Mountains, over 1,600 in all, led by Sir Bard and 2 wildling chiefs. That night, Arthur and his commanders gathered around a rough wooden table in a tent. a map of the Riverlands spread out beneath an oil lamp. Sir Bard speared a chunk of cheese and chewed as he spoke. When I rode in, Karen said Starfall's harvest is mostly gathered. The Arbor Fleet only patrols the summer sea outside Starfall, blockading merchant traffic but otherwise idle. It seems Sir Norbert has done his duty, Arthur said, filling a cup of ale until foam spilled the rim. We've been at Mingwan a week and Earl Paxton has made no move. Jello, sharpening his longsword, spoke up. You forgot, Earl Paxton sent 20 barrels of wine. A few soldiers stole some, got drunk, and you had them flogged. The tent burst into laughter. One wildling chief laughed so hard he nearly tipped the lamp. 20 barrels for a few soldiers' heads? Earl Paxton knows how to pay debts. Sir Bard slapped his armored thigh with a clang. Arthur laughed too, wiping ale from his mouth. The merchant who brought the wine said it was compensation from the Arbor for the Roxton's losses. A gentleman doesn't keep what others value, so I gave the rest to Earl Quinn. When the laughter died down, Bard's face grew serious. Vassals on Starfall's lands have started conscripting men. They're being sent to Shingi Fort to be drilled under Sir William. Preparations against the Arbor Fleet. Arthur nodded. We can spare a laugh, but we must not be careless. There's more, Bard went on. Sir Carlo of Brymont reports Hornhill is raising levies. He plans to stall Randall Tarley and Hornhill's forces. Arthur straightened. If Hornhill is calling up men, Highgarden has ordered a move. We have to take Mingwan quickly. Conscripts take about a week to train. Jello said, sheathing his sword with a clean hiss. Our siege engines are nearly ready. If we need to, we can begin the assault tomorrow. Arthur was about to answer when a guard knocked and called from outside. My lord, Earl Quinn requests an audience. Earl Quinn Rookton walked into the council tent slowly, flanked by 2 armed guards. Arthur studied the Earl of Old Hill. Quinn looked at least 10 years older than he had a week ago. The lines around his mouth were deeper, and his shoulders were stooped. Arthur asked, Sir, have you made up your mind? Quinn's Adam's apple bobbed. His voice came out raw and hoarse. My lord, I will surrender. I will do as you command. He lifted his head. His eyes were rimmed in red, full of a fury he kept swallowing down. His right hand opened and closed at his side, a nervous motion. Seeing the Starfall army bolstered by reinforcements from the Red Mountains had finally shattered whatever illusions he'd had. The Arbor Fleet's supposed containment of Starfall's main force had been a lie. In the past week, his lands had been burned, his vassals slaughtered, his people bled. Yet the Redwine family, who had stirred these troubles, had stood aside while over 2,000 men crossed the Red Mountains to join the siege. It was impossible to call it anything but deliberate neglect. Arthur watched him, puzzled. Why did you refuse to surrender for a week? He asked. Quinn's mouth twisted. A letter from Highgarden, he rasped. They told us your main force was pinned down guarding against an Arbor Fleet attack and would not cross the Red Mountains in force. He finally understood that, aside from 20-odd barrels of compensation wine, the rest of that letter had been false. What did wine matter now? His carefully raised heir, Meredith, would not be brought back. Burned farms and razed homes could not be healed with cork and glass. If the Rooktons had to taste this ruin, Quinn thought bitterly, perhaps the Redwines would learn the taste of loss too, paid, of course, in wine. Sir Bard scratched his thick black beard and let a humorless smile crease his face. They said they were held up by the harvest, he murmured. Somehow the crops along the Torrent River did better than last year. Arthur waved a hand. It's getting late. The council is adjourned. Then he signaled crisply, Go prepare. If Earl Quinn cannot open the gates for us, we will force them. Inside Mingwan Castle, the mood was nothing like the cold efficiency of Arthur's camp. In the great hall, Lady Ayanna and the handful of knights and Scholar Hicks had gathered around a long table. The candles had burned down to their stubs, wax pooled into grotesque drips on the holders like small mountains. Scholar Hicks cleared his throat. My lady, most of the villages and towns under Minghuan have been struck. Nearly all the levies and vassals have been intercepted and cut to pieces. Lady Ayanna's face was hollowed by grief. She'd been taking poppy milk at night just to sleep and to blur the memory of her eldest son's death. Hicks went on. Aside from the wounded sent from Starfall, only a few dozen men at a time, small parties of levies, have slipped in through weak spots to the west. We have a little over 300 fit soldiers inside the castle. And our food? She asked so softly it was barely a breath. Hicks offered a thin comfort. Enough for 1 to 2 years for our 300, but Earl Paxton has not replied, and Highgarden says reinforcements are being organized. I don't know if we can wait. The unspoken meaning hung in the air. Beyond the castle walls, the enemy camp boomed and roared. From the battlements, one could see a vast host joining the besiegers. A young handmaiden buried her face in her apron and sobbed. The sound seemed too loud in the silent hall. Enough! The captain of the guard slammed a gauntleted fist against the table. He rose with a creak of armor, sweat stinging from days of not being unbelted. They can't get in! He tried to make it a rallying cry. We have walls and a moat. If they try, they will lose at least 1,000 men. They're human. Arrows take them down. Stones crush them. Blades cut them. Hold fast. Highgarden will be here soon. They will. His voice wavered where he had meant it to be firm. After the others dispersed, Lady Ayanna went to the sept. Moonlight fractured through stained glass into shards of color across the statues of the seven. Her daughters knelt lighting candles before the maiden. Her youngest son, Edwin, slept curled at the warrior's feet, clutching a wooden sword too big for him. "Mother," Lyanna whispered, looking up. Candlelight trembled on her young face. "Have the seven gods abandoned House Rookton?" Lady Ayanna reached out, smoothing her daughter's hair until it lay perfectly. She hesitated, then said, "We have been abandoned by our liege lord." Dawn the next day spilled across the battlements and revealed the full scope of the besieging army. They had arranged themselves in a fan that sealed off Mingwan from the countryside. Armor flashed like a cold sea. In the front ranks, prisoners pushed small carts piled high with earth and stone to begin filling the moat. Their clothes were ragged, blood dried on some faces. Massive siege engines crouched behind them, and more than 20 scaling ladders were already laid out, ready to be hurled against the walls. On the tower, defenders' hands slicked with sweat on longbow grips. Spearmen's knees shook. Many had seen the rooted levies return, men missing limbs, howling in the night. Young recruits knelt behind crenels, praying softly to the warrior. A gray-haired veteran tipped back a flask while the liquor seeped into his beard and onto his leather breastplate. "Do not be afraid," the captain shouted, striding the parapet and waving his sword. "They bleed and break like any man. Arrows and stones will take them down." "Hold," he called. "Highgarden will come." A guard interrupted, pointing down into the mist-pressed field. "My lord, is that not Lord Quinn?" The captain leaned out. 3 riders stood outside the moat. The one in the center bore the Rookton banner high. Even across the trench, the captain recognized his liege. Quinn's voice carried over the morning hush, unusually clear and steady. "Captain," he called, "by right as Earl of Old Hill I command you, lower the drawbridge, open the city gates, and come out to surrender." His words landed like a stone in still water. Along the wall, a ripple of disbelief turned into panic. A few levies dropped their spears and shouted, "We surrender!" The captain's face drained of color. "But, Captain, obey the order," Quinn called again. The captain clenched his jaw. "My lord, wait." He whirled away from the Merlin and hissed to his sergeant. "I must report this to my lady. Do not lower the bridge until I return." Horn was racing down the tower when a groaning metallic creak came from the gate. Someone had begun to turn the winch. His breath caught. The drawbridge was moving. The captain abandoned all dignity and ran toward the sept, the clanks of his armor sounding like alarm bells down the corridor. He burst into the chapel, breathless and wild. Sunlight splintered through the glass onto Lady Ayanna's pale face as she held her daughters. "My lady," he gasped, voice raw from the run, "Lord Quinn has called for the gates to be opened." Sweat stung his eyes. "Do you wish me to lead a sortie?" Lady Ayanna tightened her hold on her girls. She looked at the stained glass, at the carved gods, at her own family crest. "No, Captain," she said with a calmness that steadied the room. "Where would we run to?" She straightened as if to a decision. "This is our home." Outside, the drawbridge fell with a sound like a knell, the single resonant boom that announced the end of Minghuan. Chapter 187, From the Old Hills to the Old Town. For a week, the steady stream of wounded and the grim news of falling reinforcements had hollowed out the will of Mingwan City's garrison. When the enemy's relief force appeared on the horizon, their morale collapsed entirely. The final fatal blow came when Earl Quinn himself rode out and surrendered at the city gate, an act that broke whatever resolve remained. By the time Arthur entered Mingwan, Jello had already led 50 leather-armored infantrymen from Starfall City to secure the situation. They gathered everyone in the central courtyard. The soldiers' chainmail still held the morning dew, their longswords dry and sharp. More than 30 archers were posted on the walls, arrows nocked and eyes sweeping the streets below. From the surrounding lanes came the sound of splintering doors as men searched house to house. "Sir Bard," Arthur called, turning to the man who had been brought in with him. "As I promised, my men will not pillage homes or burn fields. During our occupation, you and your family will be treated as captives, but kept in your own rooms. I will protect you from harm." Earl Quinn's face was ashen, like a man long sick and not yet healed. He nodded mechanically. "My lord, thank you for your mercy." He moved slowly toward his wife and daughters, chains clanking with each heavy step. His wife, Ayana, clung to the children. The girls buried their faces in their mother's skirts, shoulders shaking. Jello stepped forward, copper studs on his leather armor flashing in the sun. "How do you want the captives dealt with?" he asked, indicating the 300 people gathered in the yard. "Classify them," Arthur said. "Those who wish to stay may stay and serve. Those who do not want to stay shall be dismissed. Register those who will remain," he added after a moment. He swept his gaze over the frightened faces. "As for the rest, let them go. We do not kill those who surrender." Unarmed, without horses or weapons, and with their lord in custody, they were no threat. "My lord," Penrose, Arthur's young squire, came up at a trot to keep pace. His face was full of regret. "The siege engines we built, we couldn't use them. They were all prepared in vain." He had supervised most of their construction and had hoped for a different outcome. Arthur ran his hand along a tapestry in the Lord's Hall, feeling its rough weave as sunlight slanted through the stained glass and cast mottled shadows across the carpet. "I'm very glad we didn't have to use them," he said quietly. Siege warfare was a meat grinder in any age, terrible for attacker and defender alike. To take Mingwan without a bloodbath felt like a mercy from the seven gods. Arthur's fingers found the carved golden ring on the armrest of the main seat, the Rookton family's sigil. "Send for the scholar," he ordered the guards. Scholar Hicks arrived soon after, his robe hem dusted with travel. "Give me the castle's inventory and the most recent letters," Arthur said shortly. "I'll fetch them at once," the scholar replied and hurried off. "Jimmy, take your men with the scholar," Arthur told another lieutenant. "Bring the correspondence, and once you have the inventory list, start stock-taking the castle's supplies." Sir Bard took a seat and asked, "Arthur, what are our plans now?" "The map," Arthur replied. Zack unrolled a cowhide cylinder and spread a map across the long table on the dais. Arthur traced the area west of Mingwan with his finger, an endless plain and forest bisected by a winding river labeled on the parchment as the Meadowbrook River. The lands along the Meadowbrook were held by the Hightower family, who ruled Old Town, said to be as wealthy as the Lannisters, and able to raise far more men than a typical lord in the Riverlands. Lord Leighton Hightower had many children, and the family had married into powerful houses across the region: Tyrell, Rowan, Florent, Redwayne, Fossaway, making their influence deep and wide. Sir Bard watched Arthur as the tension set into his shoulders. "Arthur," he warned, "the Hightowers are strong. A head-on attack on Old Town would be unwise." "I'm not an idiot," Arthur said, rolling his eyes. "Old Town is too big to take at once. If we move against them, it will be in the same way we handled Old Hill, through harassment. We'll strike at the border territories and smaller castles first, slowly wearing them down." His finger paused over several small fortifications marked on the map. Sir Bard exhaled. He had feared Arthur might gamble on overconfidence after taking Mingwan so smoothly. "Besides," Arthur continued, "capturing Mingwan is a slap in the face to Highgarden. They won't ignore it. I'll watch their reaction before making any big moves. This region isn't far from the Red Mountains. If they bring overwhelming force, we'll withdraw in good order with what we've taken." Cautious and mindful of retreat, Arthur planned to bleed the Riverlands as much as he could while keeping his lines of escape clear, Teach them the cost of provoking Starfall City. Scholar Hicks returned with the letters tucked under his arm and several scrolls in his robe. Arthur skimmed them, reports from Highgarden and Rookton's vassals. One dispatch, dated 3 days earlier, stated that levies from Old Town and Horn Hill were being mobilized to come to Highgarden's aid. Arthur had expected Highgarden to take notice after Earl Quin's capture and the occupation of Mingwan. He had already heard from Sir Carlo in Braemont that Horn Hill was stirring. With attention drawn toward Braemont, Arthur judged that Randall Tarley would be unlikely to abandon his own lands and march out rashly to help. Old Town, though, demanded close watch. With ties to House Tyrell, Duke Mace's wife being a Hightower, Old Town now felt threatened by Mingwan's fall. Over the next few days, Arthur dispatched scouts and rangers to shadow movements from the west toward Old Town and from the north toward Horn Hill. He ordered Sir Bard to reorganize Mingwan's defenses, repair its works, and begin transferring the spoils of war back to Derlenburg. Chapter 188. Old Town sends out troops. The Hightower rose like a blade through the morning mist, a colossal spire of white megaliths built on Battle Island. Where the honey wine met the whispering sound, its wide estuary shimmered beneath the eternal fire at the tower's crown. The guiding light could be seen from the Red Wine Straits, hundreds of nautical miles away, true to the Hightower family motto, "We light the way." Old Town streets radiated outward from the tower like the spokes of a wheel. On clear mornings, merchants could tell the hour by the direction of the tower's shadow across the cobbles. Yet Lord Leighton Hightower himself had not left the Hightower in years, entrusting the running of his domain to his sons. He had even delegated the recent summons from Highgarden to support the Roxton family of Old Hill. Heavy footsteps echoed up the spiral staircase. Grey Iron. Garth Hightower was climbing the white stone steps with brisk, angry strides. He had barely recovered from severe heatstroke after the Starfall tourney, thanks to a Citadel Meister's care. During his convalescence, he had learned that Arthur Snow, the Dawn Sword, had been crowned champion and had defeated him. Furious, Garth had smashed his medicine bowl. "Damn Dornish sun," he muttered, fingers worrying the hilt of his sword. If not for that scorching heat, Snow would not have beaten him. He would have been the champion. Now Snow had brought the honor to himself. This was the Riverlands, Garth's home ground. He would not be thwarted again. Thank the Seven for another chance. Sunlight slanted through the Hightower's windows, dappling his armor as he climbed like a beast poised to spring. Lost in imagined triumph over Arthur Snow, Garth nearly ran into the guards outside the council chamber. They made a quick salute and pushed open the oak door carved with the Hightower sigil. Inside, colored light from stained glass fractured across the floor. His brothers sat around a table spread with a map. A Maester and Sir Morland Tyrell, captain of the Old Town City Watch, were already present. "Garth, you've come at just the right time," Baelor said with his usual easy smile, though his eyes were grave. He motioned for Garth to sit. The Maester cleared his throat and tapped the map with bony fingers. Latest news. Mingwan City has fallen to Sir Arthur Snow. Earl Quin Roxton and his family are imprisoned in the castle. Baelor sighed. After that letter from Starfall accusing the Redwynes, I expected tension between the Riverlands and Dorne, but I never thought Sir Arthur would cross the Red Mountains and strike Old Hill. And he actually took Mingwan. With Mingwan as a base, Arthur Snow can push deep into the Honeywine Valley without worrying about supply lines, Sir Morland warned, stroking his white beard. We must respond quickly. Morland Tyrell was Duke Mason's uncle. The Old Town City Watch was the city's alert and guard force, roughly the equivalent of King's Landing's watch. Garth noticed his elder brother's brow furrowing as Baelor drew a line on the map. I've already told the Mullendore family of Highgarden and the Iku family of Sunhouse to heighten their vigilance. If need be, they should fall back to their keeps and wait for Old Town's conscripts to finish training. That's not enough, Garth said, frowning. Passive defense won't work. If we sit and wait while their army consolidates, those Dornishan raiders will slip back into the Red Mountains with their plunder. I should lead the Hightower cavalry and infantry as a vanguard, joining our vassals along the way. We'll meet Snow on the field and restore Riverland honor. The Maester adjusted his bronze-rimmed spectacles. It's risky. The letter from Mingwan said Earl Quinn led over 200 cavalry. He was defeated and taken, and his heir was killed. Don't compare me to Earl Quinn, Garth snapped. He was unhorsed by a newly knighted Sir Loras at the Starfall tourney. I broke a dozen lances against the Dawn Sword. Only the weather robbed me of victory. And Earl Quinn didn't send scouts or secure his lines. He was ambushed and captured in his own lands, the master added. Garth shook his head, scorn on his face. Baelor lifted a hand to quiet him. Sunlight shifted across his features as he weighed their words. The master's cautions aren't unfounded. Arthur Snow is formidable. On the lists and in the field, his record is exceptional. Garth sprang to his feet, battle fire in his eyes. You saw it yourself, brother. I only lost because of that damn Dornish sun. Old Town has more than 500 fully armed cavalry, and our watchmen, mercenaries, and archers can far outnumber any horse alone. I will win in the Riverlands. Baelor remembered Garth at Starfall and the rashness that had cost him. Finally, he nodded. Very well. You shall lead the Hightower cavalry as vanguard. Garth's face lit with triumph, then Baelor continued, fixing him with a stern look. But you will follow Sir Morland's command. You will not act on your own. Garth's smile fell. He opened his mouth, then shut it under Baelor's gaze. Sir Morland, Baelor said to the captain, you will take half the Old Town City Watch and our archers to Mingwan as the vanguard. Your orders are to defend and contain, not to seek a pitched battle with the Starfall forces. Hold the Dornish there until Old Town's forces or Highgardens can arrive. Make sure they do not escape. Understood. Sir Morland rose and saluted, his armor clanking. Garth, reluctant but bound by his brother's decision, echoed the pledge. Chapter 189. Deadlock. Arthur stood on the battlements of Mingwan, his hand resting on the cool stone, eyes fixed on the unbroken green hills to the west. Since taking the city, the war seemed to have ground to a standstill. Reports from the scouts and cavalry he'd sent out showed only refugees fleeing Old Town. There were no Riverlands armies moving to reinforce the area, nor any columns advancing on Mingwan. Arthur was wary of striking into the Mead River basin. The terrain worked against him. Aside from a few castles near the foothills, the land opened into a vast plain. Plains favored cavalry, and Arthur simply did not have enough horses to meet Riverland's mounted men in open combat. Dorne's sand horses couldn't cross the Red Mountains to reach the Riverlands, which was why he'd left the Starfall cavalry under Rosso Brunn to guard the sea at Lighthouse Keep and watch for an approach by the Arbor fleet. Old Town itself was dangerous. It had a dense population and a strong martial tradition. Its knights were plentiful. If Arthur and his men abandoned the safety of the hills and met Riverland's cavalry on the plain, their lack of mounted troops could bring disaster. Even a single reckless advance might end in annihilation. So for now, he kept his forces contained. He rode only in captured war horses, sending small bands to raid villages by the old methods, and strictly forbade deep incursions into the Mead. Mingwan gave him shelter and good food, and with Starfall City secure behind him, he had no pressing reason to rush. After a tour of the towers, he sent Sharpwing, his hawk, to scout the surrounding countryside. Finding nothing of consequence, he returned to the training yard to practice the sword and drill a few men in basic but effective techniques. At noon, he went to the keep's great hall for a meal. Sunlight poured through the high windows, making the silverware flash on the long table. The spread was rich with the bounty of central Westeros, geese stuffed and glazed with dark mulberry sauce, golden roasted breads, steaming barley and venison soup, and salted pork marinated in almond milk. Around the table, the men ate like soldiers who had earned a moment of peace. In Braemont, I heard the Maester praise the Riverlands for its produce and its food. Penrose said between bites, wiping purple stains from his lips. I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't. Jello dunked a slice of roasted bread into the gravy and wolfed it down, his beard trembling as he chewed. Food you don't have to pay for always tastes better, he said, then drained a cup of dry Riverlands red. Sir Bard savored a spoonful of the venison soup, broth trickling down his beard. There's a sweetness from the barley and a richness from the meat you don't get on the islands, he said, ladling himself more. Jimmy pushed his bowl forward with a grin. You should try the sisters' stew from the Three Sisters, he said, counting ingredients on his fingers. onions, radishes, barley, white and yellow turnips, clams, big chunks of cod, 3 kinds of crab, then a thick layer of cream and butter. They serve it in a hollowed black loaf. My brothers always lick the pot clean. Zack mopped up a piece of peppered pork with his fingers and nodded in agreement. The hall rang with cutlery and conversation, little of it war talk. Only when the last honey-glazed apple disappeared did Arthur tap his silver cup. The clink cut through the noise. "All right," he said, meeting each face along the table. "I want your thoughts. What do we do next?" Sir Bard was blunt. "We should withdraw while we can and fall back to Starfall. We've already taken what we can from Mingwan and its surrounding lands. No sense tempting fate." Jello agreed. "Old Town's power is too great. On the plain, their cavalry will have us." One by one, the others offered their views, and the consensus took shape. Neither attacking Old Town nor holding Mingwan in place with the present force was wise. Arthur listened, then spoke. "We can retreat," he said, "but we cannot abandon the fight." He outlined the plan he'd been considering. "We'll use the same principle the Vulture King used against Starfall. We'll hold the Red Mountains as our refuge. If we can win a battle, we fight. If we can't, we withdraw into the passes and make them pay for every step. If the Riverlands enter the mountains, we ambush them. If they pull back, we continue our raids on Old Town's holdings." He explained how that fit with Redwine's naval posture. "Redwine can blockade Starfall with the Arbor Fleet. We'll use the mountains to harass Old Town and pressure Highgarden. Old Town lacks a major river barrier like the Torrent. Their lands are exposed to raids." Sir Bard frowned. "How long can we keep this up? War eats resources. Starfall can hardly bear an endless drain." Arthur shook his head. "I'm no warmonger. This isn't for conquest. This is to obtain fair terms at the negotiating table." He held up 3 fingers. "There are 3 likely outcomes. Best case, Redwine, with the pressure of the other Riverlands houses, agrees to a settlement, compensates for the destruction of Peach Garden, and we stop the raids. Second, they react by massing troops and send a large force to Starfall by fleet. That escalates the war and drags Dorne directly into the conflict. Third, we end up in a stalemate. Either the Riverlands abandon their hold on Old Town, or they spend heavily to create standing forces specifically to counter our raids." Sir Bard nodded. "We can't beat Redwine head-on. This is the only path to justice." The men voiced their support, and with their consent, Arthur closed the council. A lord needed to bind his followers when facing a stronger foe. They had a plan: harass, hold the mountains, force political pressure, and for the moment, that would have to be enough. Late that afternoon, when the sun slanted low, the scout commander Xiongdi rode into the courtyard and dismounted with news. "Lord," he said, bowing, "Old Town has sent troops. The scouts returned not long ago. About 1,000 men are marching toward Mingwan. By our reckoning, there's still a half-day's ride out." Chapter 190, Negotiation. After Xiongdi's report, Arthur climbed to the highest tower of Mingwan City. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and linked his mind to Sharpwing. When he opened his eyes again, the world had narrowed to a vast blue-gray sweep. Sharpwing's wings cut the morning wind with a soft whistle and bore them westward. From above, the Honeywine River was a silver ribbon threading the green plain. Sharpwing's keen gaze picked out shifting black specks on the ground. An army. Arthur guided Sharpwing down to circle. The formations resolved. High tower banners on a gray field with a white tower snapping in the breeze, mingled with the crests of smaller houses. He recognized the white butterfly of House Mullendor from Highgarden and flags of the families near Old Hill. His connection to Sharpwing left him a touch dizzy. The further he strayed, and the longer he stayed linked, the stronger the head rush. He rubbed his temples and let out a wry smile. The Hightower vanguard alone could equal the full muster of some minor houses, and they were well equipped: gleaming armor, long sharp spears, powerful war horses. This was the strength of the Riverlands nobility. The force split in 2. The footmen set up camp on the main road between Mingwan and the Honeywine, pitching tents and digging latrines. The cavalry, a torrent of steel, thundered straight toward the city. The ground trembled under their hoofbeats. From the battlements, Arthur squinted. The lead knight lifted his helm and revealed a familiar face. Garth Hightower, the Grey Iron. the same Garth who'd nearly been cooked by Arthur's antics at the Starfall tourney. 600 armored cavalry arrayed themselves below the walls, their armor flashing. Garth paraded them, their horses steaming, hooves carving dust. After the display, they wheeled away as fast as they had come, leaving flattened grass and a haze of grit. "My lord, a messenger from the Riverlands," a soldier panted. "Let him in." Arthur straightened his collar and walked to the gate. The messenger proved an odd one, Sir Mark Mullendore. He wore the butterfly of his house, and perched on his shoulder was a small black and white monkey in a miniature mail shirt. The creature hopped and chirped now and then. "Sir Arthur Snow, Dawn Sword," Mark said with a casual bow, teasing the monkey. "I come for Sir Merlin and Sir Garth. They invite you to parley outside the city. Each side brings 7 men. You choose the place." Jello, arms crossed, snorted. "You look less like a knight and more like a circus entertainer." Mark grinned. "Coincidentally, Sir Garth says the same." The monkey peered at Jello and made a mischievous face. "If the Dornish harm the messenger, they'll only kill a monkey-trick entertainer," Mark added, and the monkey chirped twice for emphasis. Arthur watched the messenger closely. Despite the clowning, Mark's eyes were sharp. "Tell them I'll negotiate," Arthur said at last, "provided their cavalry falls back to a safe distance." "As you wish." Mark bowed with theatrical flamboyance. The monkey nearly tumbled off his shoulder, and soldiers around them laughed. Time and place arranged, Mark vaulted into the saddle. Young Penrose craned his neck. "Where'd that monkey come from?" "From the Summer Isles," Mark called over his shoulder, and the monkey mockingly made a throat-slitting gesture at Penrose. "A fearsome assassin," Mark said dryly, then rode away. "What are they planning?" Jimmy asked, scratching his head and watching them go. Sir Bard stroked his gray beard. "The Riverlands don't want to storm the city. If this can be settled by words, they'll take it." Arthur nodded. "Everyone, prepare. We leave the city soon." The Riverlanders kept their word. When Arthur led 6 retainers out, the cavalry had pulled back to the agreed distance. Only the Prince of 7 warhorses marked the spot on a bare hill chosen for the parley. The open ground made ambush harder. A thin breeze carried the scent of dust and grass. After names were exchanged, Sir Merlin spoke first, his tone steady and full of authority. "Sir Arthur, you saw our cavalry. That was merely the vanguard. Release all prisoners, withdraw to Starfall City, and swear never to invade the Riverlands again, and I will see the Arbor Fleet lifts its blockade of Starfall Port at once." Arthur shook his head. "So long as the Redwind family's crimes go unpunished, the mountaineers of the Red Mountains will not stop harrying the Riverlands. I will not withdraw. As for the naval blockade, let them keep it. Its effect on Starfall City is limited." "Then there is nothing left to discuss," Garth spurred forward, face flushed. "We should gather our men and settle this beneath the walls. Why leave the advantage of the castle to fight you in open ground?" Arthur replied, a faint smile on his lips. Garth bristled. "You're afraid," he accused. "I'm no fool," Arthur said calmly. "You have superior cavalry, but horses can't carry you over stout walls. If you want Mingwan, you'll have to take it properly." He turned to Sir Merlin. "I have food for a year within these walls, and I will defend them to the last. I believe that for every Dornish life taken, 10 of your Riverlands will fall. That should make plain our resolve to seek justice and to punish the Redwines." "Coward!" Garth roared, his voice booming across the hill. "Snow, you shame Dawn Sword's name. Justice is just an excuse to hide behind stones." His horse pawed and kicked dust. Arthur's expression stayed composed. "Garth, you were beaten by me at the Starfall tourney," he said, then deliberately looked away from him with a teasing smile and addressed Sir Merlin. "If Highgarden will agree, I'll duel Sir Garth one-on-one, under the witness of the 7. "Merlin, say yes!" Garth almost toppled from his saddle. This was the chance he'd longed for. If not for that blasted Dornish weather, I'd never have lost. Sir Merlin's white hair lifted in the wind as he shook his head. "Sir Arthur, if that is your posture, remain behind your walls." He turned his horse, his voice cutting. "When the main Riverlands host encircles you, I hope you will still be smiling." Merlin rode off first. Garth shot Arthur a hateful glare before following, his cloak nearly torn in his haste. Arthur watched them sink into the dust, a smile easing across his face. "Prepare for a siege," Sir Bard said. "The real test is coming." "No," Arthur said sharply. Give the order. Cook dinner tonight, and at midnight, the whole army will launch a surprise attack. Inside the command tent of the Hightower Vanguard, the air was thick with tension. Merlin, why did you stop me from dueling Snow? Everything would have been settled if I'd beaten him. Garth exploded, furious at missing the chance to face Arthur. Do you think I can't beat the Dawn Sword? Garth went on, chest heaving. I'm telling you, if it weren't for that damn Dornish sun, he never would have bested me. Merlin Tyrell sat calm on a folding chair, stroking his pale beard. Calm down, Garth. He kept his voice steady. It's not that I doubt your courage, but we cannot accept the terms Sir Arthur has set, nor can we promise anything in Highgarden's name. And Baelor was plain with us before we marched. Our task here is defense and containment, not a decisive battle. Merlin did not truly think Garth could prevail. Arthur Snow's reputation preceded him. The man bore the name of the Dane family's Dawn Sword for a reason. He had been the champion of the Starfall City tourney and, early on, had twice bested the Red Viper. He was no easy foe. Merlin could not justify risking Garth on a duel he might lose, but it was necessary to say what he had said in front of the others. At the remark that Merlin did not question his bravery, Garth's anger ebbed. He waved a hand. Forget it. Once the army besieges Mingwan City and captures Snow, there'll be plenty of chances to finish this. Merlin inclined his head and let out a small sigh. He addressed the other knights and vassals in the tent, their faces tight with the desire not to be pulled into the quarrel. All right, sirs. His voice regained the authority of a commander. We've only just arrived. We must organize men to build the camp and prepare the siege engines. Ready for the siege to come, each of you will carry out the duties I've given. The knights bowed and filed out, the dull thumps of armor and boots on the carpet fading until only Merlin and Garth remained. Merlin's tone softened. Garth, if you'll take it, lead the cavalry to strengthen the patrols and clear out those wildling horse and scouts. Understood, Garth said aloud, but inwardly he was contemptuous. Strengthen patrols? Snow had declared he'd stock a year's provisions and would hold Mingwan City to the death, hiding behind a wall like a coward. What courage was there in that? Still, the wildling horse were a nuisance, light-armed riders, fast and slippery as flies. They needed to be dealt with. He left the command tent and strode through the camp in torchlight. Near the tack area, a cluster of horsemen and squires laughed around Mark Mullendore and his monkey. The animal, clad in a tiny chainmail, was doing a handstand, drawing whoops and cheers. Sir Mark, Garth snapped, this is a military camp, not a circus. Take your men and clear out those wildlings. A young squire hesitated. My lord, I still have duties to my knight. Garth's sneer flashed in the firelight. Then summon your master and let him come with you. He pointed toward the dark plains beyond the camp. I'll pay bounties for wildling heads. Perhaps Sir Mark's monkey can draw them all in. While they gape, you can cut them down and claim your reward. The men exchanged glances. Mark patted the monkey, which squeaked twice in displeasure. Yes, my lord. He made an exaggerated bow. The monkey performed a ridiculous gesture. No one laughed now. Go then. Tell any cavalry who want a bounty they may join. Garth watched them prepare and then turned away, impatience pricking him. The camp's noise receded behind him. Not far off was his private tent, its flap bearing the Hightower White Tower on a gray field. The guards at the entrance straightened. Inside, squires had spread feather mattresses and lit incense to keep the mosquitoes at bay. A small table held fresh bread, cheese, and cured meat. My lord, shall I take off your armor? A young squire asked, holding a linen cloth and oil. Garth had meant to refuse. A commander should keep his sword at hand, but thought of Snow's boast and shrugged. Take it off, and fetch me some golden arbor wine. The squires blinked. My lord, you said before we marched that you don't drink during wartime. Garth gave a short laugh as the squires began to unbuckle his cuirass. Humph, Sir Arthur plans to hole up and defend Mingwan City to the death with Dornish and wildlings. This war may drag on. Better to be comfortable. Piece by piece, the armor came off, the hardened plate, the chainmail, the sweat-soaked leather. With each strip of metal, he felt lighter. And bring a camp follower, he said, as one of the squires turned to leave. You know the sort I prefer. They exchanged knowing smiles and went to fetch the wine and a woman. Garth, in a linen shirt, tore off a crust of bread and dipped it in butter, thinking of the heat of his anger with Merlin and the lack of outlet for it. A quarter of an hour later, the squire who had gone for the wine returned with a full cup and a troubled look. "Why did you take so long?" Garth asked. "After word got out that Sir Arthur vows to hold Mingwan for a year, knights everywhere have been begging for wine," the squire said, filling his cup. "I had to tell the quartermaster it was for you to get this from the stores." The words made Garth frown. Something about the camp's sudden thirst for wine put a prick of unease in him he could not yet name. The other squire led in the camp follower, a woman with a sultry smile. "My lord," she said, "your squire told me serving you will be well rewarded." Garth drained his cup. "Gold dragons, if you please. Make sure your service pleases me." After food and wine, the squires slipped out as discreetly as they had come. Night deepened across the Hightower camp. Bonfires sprang up one by one, and, save for the mournful trilling of nightingales, the whole place settled into a hush. "My lord, wake up! There's a commotion outside." Garth Hightower frowned in his sleep as the woman in his arms shifted restlessly. Beneath the velvet covers her skin was like silk. He instinctively tightened his hold, pulling her closer. "I think it's you making the commotion, isn't it?" he mumbled without opening his eyes, his rough hand squeezing her waist. "You've been very good service. Now let me sleep. Be quiet." His voice was thick with sleep. "If you wake me again, the payment will change from a gold dragon to a silver stag." The woman didn't answer. Suddenly her fingers clenched his arm so hard her nails bit into his flesh. "My lord," she cried, urgency and panic in her voice. "There are horns outside, fighting, and firelight." Garth's eyes shot open. The sleep fell away like a cloak. He half sat up, the covers sliding down to reveal his broad chest. Outside the tent, the low, urgent blast of horns cut the night. Metal clashed, shouts rose and fell, and the sounds drew nearer. Orange-red light flickered against the canvas, the glow of flames. "By the seven gods!" He tossed the covers aside. His naked body chilled in the night air as he tumbled from bed, bare feet hitting the animal skin rug. Arthur's words ran through his head. "Although you have many cavalry, you cannot cross the city walls. I have a year's provisions and will hold Mingwan City to the death. Krog! Dill!" Rage flashed through him as he bellowed for his attendants, hearing betrayal and failure in every lost post. The woman curled beneath a sheet and watched him with wide, terrified eyes. Garth snatched up a scattered shirt. The silken fabric clung to him in wrinkles. Two half-asleep attendants stumbled in, one still rubbing his eyes. "Wake up, you fools," Garth roared, kicking over a copper basin with a clang. "The camp is under attack. Bring me my armor." Krog and Dill sobered at once, faces drained of color. They fumbled for chainmail and plate, metal clashing as they dressed. As Garth pulled on his mail, the tent flap was thrown wide. Knights swept in, armor streaked with soot, their expressions wild. "My lord," the lead knight gasped, helmet crooked, voice raw. "Dornish are attacking at night. The camp's ablaze." "Don't panic. Have the standard-bearer raise my banner." Garth seized his helmet. The metal was cold and biting in his hand. "Order every cavalryman to the horses." He buckled the chin strap, eyes burning. "Assemble the cavalry. A single proper charge will crush these curs who think to sneak upon us under cover of darkness." The knights saluted and backed out. "Quick! Breastplate!" Garth barked to his men. Krog's hands shook as he buckled the straps. When Garth rode out of the tent, the sight froze his blood. War horses that should have been held were panicked, bolting through the camp, trampling bonfires and tents. In the firelight, mounted raiders flickered and vanished, flinging torches from one pavilion to the next. Smoke choked the stars, and the burning canvas stank of pitch and oil. "I should hang the stablemaster. And the sentries, and Mark Mullendore and his damned monkey." Garth's gauntleted hand clenched until the joints cracked. His warhorse stood tethered near the tent, restless and pawing. Many horses shared its fear. He vaulted into the saddle, his armor thudding. "Slaughter these cowards! Long live Old Town!" He drew his longsword and charged. The torch-bearing Dornishman stooped to set a tent alight and barely had time to look up before Garth's blade crashed down. The Hightower-forged sword bit through leather and flesh. The raider screamed and tumbled, blood spattering the burning canvas. Behind Garth, his standard-bearer raised the gray banner with the white tower, and 50 cavalrymen gathered quickly, shouting, "Long live Old Town!" Hooves shook the ground as they thundered into the chaos. Garth wrenched his sword free from a fallen foe's shoulder and looked about by the firelight. Starfall City infantry had already pushed through the camp's outer defenses and were locked in fierce combat with his men. The field was littered with the wounded and the dead, the earth dark with blood. "Ah!" A scream cut through the din. Under his banner, Krog's right arm had been hewn off at the shoulder by an axe. Blood spouted like a fountain. Dill lay in the mud, ashen, hands trembling, as he tried to press his spilled entrails back into a mortal wound. The standard-bearer and the guards formed a desperate ring, backs together, holding off the assault. "Do not let them break the formation. Do not let them cut down my banner." Garth ground out through clenched teeth. He pushed aside his grief and ordered the rally. The trumpeter beside him lifted a horn that hung at his neck and blew. The low, piercing note carried across the smoke-choked field. Scattered troopers heard and converged. Within moments, over 100 men gathered beneath the gray tower. "Charge!" Garth pointed his sword. The heavy cavalry formed a wedge, their steeds trampling burning canvas and ash as they drove like a river of iron into the enemy ranks. The impact tore a gap in the attackers' line and blunted Starfall City's momentum. Men on the flanks dragged themselves back toward the banner, rallying as one. Garth lifted his visor, sweat and blood streaked his face, and raised his blade. His voice rang across the field. "The Dornish resort to schemes and sneak attacks, but victory belongs to the brave." His horse reared. He tightened the reins. "Soldiers, charge with my banner. Even if we were taken by a traitorous night attack, we can yet win." He closed the visor again as his mount plunged forward. "The Seven will protect us. Long live Old Town." "Long live Garth Hightower," his men answered, voices rising as more banners joined them. Merlin Tyrell's Rose, the Mullendore Butterfly, and others. The routed and scattered recovered from shock. The gray tower became a rallying point. Under its light, a firm defensive line formed. In the burning glow, Garth stood like a god of war, and hope spread through his soldiers. "We light the way." The Hightower words rang true as steel met steel, and the battle for the camp roared on. Chapter 193, Catching a Turtle in a Jar. Just as Garth had formed his men and prepared to press the attack on the scattered enemy within the camp, a sudden flurry of horn calls cut through the night. The wildling cavalry, warriors, and Starfall City armored soldiers who had infiltrated the camp halted their assault and melted away into the darkness. Within 15 minutes, every Starfall soldier had withdrawn. The camp was left smoking, tents burning, and the ground littered with bodies. Garth was about to lead a pursuit when Sir Merlin Tyrell rode up and put himself between the Lord and his men. The old knight's meticulous white beard was singed and yellowed by flame, his armor scored with sword marks and stained with blood. "The night is deep," Merlin warned. "A rash pursuit could be an ambush. We should reorganize, take stock of our losses, and fall back to a nearby castle to consider our next move." Garth, still flushed with battle, felt the urge to argue, but the memory of Snow's trick in the dark checked him. Snow had been clever, indeed possible that this was a feint, and throughout the fighting he had never seen Snow inside the camp. Sir Merlin's counsel now seemed only more prudent. Gritting his teeth, Garth sheathed his sword and gave the order. "No pursuit. Tally supplies and aid the wounded. Put out the fires. At first light, we march to Highgarden. Send extra scouts and outposts. Watch for another attack from the Dornish. Until we reach Highgarden, keep your swords at hand and your armor on." The men sprang into action as if a great weight had been lifted. Some stamped out smoldering tents, others carried the wounded. The clink of armor mixed with muffled sobs. Even Sir Merlin bowed his head and obeyed. The knight's role that night had made it clear who truly commanded. Garth, riding through the flickering light and shadow cast by burning canvas, felt the gravity of it all settle on him. By dawn, the camp was stained the color of old blood. Garth stood before his tent, reduced to ash, heels sinking into warm embers, and wondered if the woman who had woken him had burned with it. He checked the plate on his chest. The breastplate was pitted and scarred where arrows had glanced off. Both pauldrons bore long sword gashes. The most serious mark came from a wildling's axe swing, one that had nearly unhorsed him. If not for her warning, which had given him time to arm himself properly, he and his two squires, Krog and Deer, might well have died in the attack. "My lord," his newly promoted adjutant said, snapping Garth back to the present. The young man's face was streaked with soot. He held a battered helmet. "Inventory's done. We have 1,400 men left." Hearing it, Garth felt as if his chest had been carved out. From more than 3,000 vanguard troops, only 1,400 remained. The worst losses had fallen on the vassal contingents posted around the fringe of the camp. They had taken the enemy's first blows. The cavalry were nearly wiped out. Of 600 plus, only a little over 100 still rode. Many had been drunk in their tents and burned. Others had had no time to arm or mount, and in close quarters, their blunted senses and lack of horses made them easy prey. "I meant to lead them to slaughter the enemy and win glory," Garth thought bitterly, "but I led them to an untimely death instead." Many were knights and squires bound to House Hightower, some who had trained with him since childhood, and some he had knighted with his own hand. On the road to Highgarden, Garth had forced himself to be cautious. He had personally ordered the scouts to watch for ambush from Starfall, and for a while they had found none. When Martin Mullendore, Lord of Highgarden, had learned how badly Garth had been hit and that his squires were dead, he had eagerly offered the chance for his own son to go to Old Town as a new squire to Garth. Exhausted and wary of further tricks, Garth had brushed the matter aside with vague words. It wasn't until Highgarden's mottled walls rose ahead that some of his tension eased and he agreed. Martin beamed. "My lord, it would be an honor for House Mullendore for my son to serve you." The city gates swung open with a complaining groan, and as the column passed within, the soldiers' nerves visibly relaxed. Men collapsed where they stood, slumping against walls or dropping into whatever shade they could find and falling into a deep sleep. The cavalry handed their mounts to stable boys with precise instructions to feed them well. Garth, bone-tired, felt himself sagging. Even the stoic Sir Merlin needed a squire's arm to keep going. "My lords, this way," Martin said, unusually brisk, leading Garth, Sir Merlin, and the senior knights toward the keep. "I've ordered rooms and food prepared." He called loudly for the steward, and then, with a resounding clang, the city gates slammed shut. It was the signal. From the towers and merlins climbed archers wearing Starfall city colors, and they took their places with bows already drawn. From the keep poured the Mountain Legion, soldiers in rigid formation, who quickly ringed Martin and the group of nobles and knights still preparing to enter the castle. "Well met, Sir Garth, Sir Merlin." Arthur Snow strode from the keep, fully armored and carrying two swords. "I didn't expect we'd meet here." "Arthur Snow!" Garth roared and drew his long sword. Arthur leveled one of his blades at the archers and the soldiers surrounding them. "If I were you, Sir Garth, I'd drop that sword," Arthur said. "We are not the Arbor or House Redwine. We do not kill those who surrender, nor women, children, or the old." At his command, the Starfall troops called out in unison, "Lay down your weapons. Surrender and live." Faced with down-pointed arrows and the tight ring of foes, Garth's men, exhausted and outnumbered, could not hold. The first sword hit the ground with a single bright clang, then another and another, a cascade of metal falling like rain. Sir Merlin, looking at the defeated ranks, sighed and said, "Garth, we're beaten. Drop your arms." Sir Merlin's words, grounded in cold reality, hit Garth like a hammer. He sank back to his knees as if his soul had left him. The sword in his hand clattered to the ground. Sir Martin, standing at his side, reached out and steadied the swaying knight, preventing the man who had been a god of war the night before from collapsing in front of everyone. Arthur sheathed his own sword and signaled crisply, "Disarm them. Bring them all under guard." The Mountain Legion moved with practiced efficiency. Weapons were confiscated, armor searched, prisoners bound. The exhausted Hightower officers and men, roused from sleep, were surprisingly compliant. Only a handful made a fuss when startled awake, and they were quickly subdued. Jimmy jogged down from the city wall, his longbow slung across his back, drops of morning dew still clinging to his armor. "My lord, what now?" Arthur couldn't hide the small smile that tugged at his lips. "Let the captives rest for a day. See that they are fed and given drink." He took in the spoils stacked in the courtyard, the piles of weapons and gear, the captured pack animals, the war horses in the stables, and issued another order. At dawn, load everything from Highgarden onto wagons, supplies, horses, equipment. Bring it all back to Minghuan City. To have wiped out so much of Hightower's vanguard with so little cost, and to have taken so many Riverland nobles alive, left even Arthur a little stunned. For the night raid on the Hightower camp, he had not thrown the whole army at them. He had sent Jello and the wildling leader Crow Eater to lead a force of over 1,000 armored guards from Starfall City and wildling cavalry. He had split his men because the Mountain Legion, many wearing vine armor, feared flame, and too many fighters in a night assault would have been hard to coordinate, risking friendly fire and chaos. Jimmy's archers had been divided for the same reason, part for the raid, part for an ambush outside. What Arthur had not expected was Garth's restraint. Garth had chosen not to pursue. From Sharpwing's high-eye view, Arthur had seen their inactivity and their tight, watchful formation at dawn. He guessed they planned to retire to a safe place once light came. So Arthur abandoned a second night attack and aimed for the nearest target, Highgarden itself. It was a gamble, but a correct one. Most of Highgarden's guards and levies had followed Martin Mullendore out to answer their liege's call and were away with the vanguard at the Hightower camp. In the dim hours, the Mountain Legion scaled the walls with grappling hooks and took the lightly defended castle with ease. After a day of rest, the long procession began, heading for Minghuan City. Captives pushed carts piled high with taken provisions. Herds of cattle and sheep were driven between columns, their wheels leaving deep ruts in the muddy ground. Mountain Legion soldiers rode Riverland's war horses, now wearing foreign barding, their whips cracking the air as they urged prisoners along. Arthur ordered special treatment for the important captives, prison carriages, good food, and drink. There were more than 80 of those high-value prisoners. Gals Hightower, Merlin Tyrell, Martin Mullendore, and many of Hightower's vassals and landed knights. They were valuable not only as ransom, but as bargaining chips. When the party reached Minghuan City, Arthur released the common vassal levies captured from Highgarden. Before their release, officers made sure to tell the men, loudly and repeatedly, that their suffering had been caused by Redwine's piratical actions, the blockade of Starfall City's port, and other outrages. Then the released men were handed food and clothing, supplied, it was implied, by the magnanimity of Arthur's banner. No one asked where the clothes and grain had come from. The levies were grateful, wept, and scattered like startled birds. Arthur watched them go. Those men would be excellent pawns of propaganda. Still, more than 600 captives remained in custody, mercenary knights, hired soldiers, elements of Old Town's garrison, and Hightower's household guards. Everyone had value. Even a mosquito's leg is meat, as one of his captains liked to say. They were all taken under guard, and along with the high-value prisoners, would be moved gradually toward Eagle Nest Keep in the Crimson Mountains. Back in Minghuan City's Lord's Hall, after the immediate prisoner business had been settled, Sir Bard came to report the news the scouts and messengers had compiled over the past days. Lady Namay sent word from Starkeep, the old knight said, excitement tremoring his voice. Prince Doran has ordered House Fowler and House Ironwood to deploy at Prince's Pass and Stone Road. Bard's hands were steady, but his tone betrayed him. The prince condemned Redwine's brazen piracy and the blockade of Starfall City's port. He declares that should the Riverlands infringe on any part of Dorne, it would be treated as an act of war. Arthur was taken aback. Prince Doran's support was firmer than he had expected. When he read Lady Namay's letter, he learned that Princess Ariane and Prince Oberyn had pushed hard in Dorne on his behalf, and that the letters Arthur himself had sent to leading Dornish lords had also done their work. His victories in the Riverlands, especially the swift seizure of Minghuan City, had convinced cautious Dornish houses to speak up. Most notable among them were 3 coastal families along Dorne's summer sea, House Uller of Hellgate Keep, House Cogger of Sandstone City, and House Gorgonless of Salt Shore. These lords had begun mustering and training levies. No noble wanted to be attacked by pirates, or to have trade strangled by the Arbor Fleet and an accompanying blockade. Arthur thought through why those 3 coastal houses had reacted the most. He had already strengthened defenses along Starfall City's Torrent River and shoreline. But if the Arbor fleet were to land not at Starfall, but elsewhere along Dorne's coast, the consequences could be dire. Prince Doran's orders to position troops at Prince's Pass and Stone Road likely accounted for that contingency. Arthur had never intended to beggar Dorne or to light the fuse of a general war between Dorne and the Riverlands. He had simply meant to repay the Riverlands in Redwine's coin. But the situation had spun beyond his original plan. Since events had already escalated, he would make the best of it. He folded the letter and addressed his commanders. Sir Bard, tell the men to prepare for an orderly retirement. We will fall back to Durlinburg first, and then withdraw into Eaglenest Keep in the Crimson Mountains. He wanted to see how Highgarden would respond. Would they strike for the Crimson Mountains, push for Stone Road or Prince's Pass, threaten Brymont City, land forces along the Summer Sea coast, or lower their banners and come to the table? Whatever choice they made, Arthur now held significant leverage. A host of Riverland's noble hostages and a Starfall City's defenses that would be hard to break. There was no need to risk everything in a last-stand battle at Old Hill when the strategic advantage lay squarely in his hands. Chapter 195. At the Negotiating Table. Arthur's order to withdraw swept through Starfall City like a gale. Every unit moved with the precision of long practice, swiftly transferring prisoners and spoils from Minghuan City back to Durlinburg, then along the Pebble Path toward the Crimson Mountains. Cattle and livestock that couldn't be moved were slaughtered and eaten along the way. For the first time in months, not only Arthur and the commanders, but the common soldiers had beef and mutton at every meal. The grease on some men's beards glittered in the sun, and even the skin and bones conscripts marched back rosy-cheeked and full of vigor. Arthur, however, could not bear to put the war horses down. Each was worth at least 10 gold dragons. Weighing his options, he realized there was time enough and ordered the craftsmen to repair the road so they could bring the mounts home. When the last of the supplies had been carried out of Durlinburg, Arthur personally set a torch to the oil-soaked timbers. The flames licked up and swallowed the castle. Without the keep that guarded the Pebble Path from the Crimson Mountains to Minghuan City, Arthur reasoned, it would be easier next time to seize Minghuan outright. A few days later, after he had settled affairs at Old Hill and withdrawn to Eaglenest Keep, word came that the Riverlands army had advanced on Old Hill and reoccupied Minghuan City. Sir Barton of Lighthouse Keep also reported that the Arbor fleet had tried to land at the coast but had been turned back by cavalry under Rosso Brunn and the local garrison. "Jello, Jimmy, you two take your men back to Starfall," Arthur said in the council chamber of Eaglenest Keep, his voice sharp. "Strengthen defenses and vigilance along the coast and at the mouth of the Torrent River." Jimmy's face tightened. "My lord, if we pull troops away, what if the Riverlands force pushes into the Crimson Mountains to rescue the prisoners?" Arthur's mouth lifted in a half-smile. "If they truly dare, we'll simply build more cells." Then he paused. If Duke Mace Lord Chubby Fish were leading the host, it might be another matter. He summoned the scout who had brought the news. "What banners march under the Riverlands command?" The scout counted them off on his fingers. The golden rose, the white high tower, a golden tree on white, 3 green leaves on yellow, and a flock of golden cranes on blue. "Rowan of Goldtree, Oakheart of Old Oak, Crane of Cranbrook," Jello said, sipping unsweetened lemonade. "Those lords border the Riverland's northern and western marches. Sounds like Fowler and Ironwood are keeping the ones nearest the Crimson Mountains occupied." Arthur had a proxy agreement with Earl Mattis Rowan and trusted that Mattis could persuade Duke Mace if needed. He dismissed the scout with a flick of his hand. "Prepare to move as ordered," he told Jello and Jimmy. "The coast is our priority. Be on your guard." They left at once. Arthur turned to the others in the chamber. "Sir Bard, Crow Eater, recruit 400 wildling men as reserves for the Mountain Legion and begin their training." "Yes, my lord," Crow Eater, leader of the Crow tribe, replied. "I have another matter to report." "Spare me the preamble. Speak plainly," Arthur said. "Several tribes upriver have offered full allegiance to Starfall City," Crow Eater said. "They fought well in the Riverlands campaign and wish to come under your command." Under Arthur's leadership, the wildling tribes had lately won a string of victories, taking 3 castles in succession and gathering spoils beyond what they had seen in years. They regarded Arthur almost as a god. "Granted," he said, "they'll be under your command. Follow the Eagle Nest model." He then ordered the other tribal leaders to post scouts and keep close watch on the Riverland's movements in Mingwan City. In Mingwan's own council hall, the mood was heavy, almost tangibly so. The Tyrell force that had joined with the Old Town host numbered over 2,000, and its commander was not Duke Mace, but his second son, Garland Tyrell. Garland, elder brother of Loras, the Hundred Flowers Knight, was a larger, tougher man than his famed sibling, his cheeks framed by a thick beard that gave him a grimmer air. "My lords, what are your recommendations?" Garland asked from his high-backed chair. "We retook Mingwan without losing a man," Earl Mattis Rowan said flatly. "That's a good start." "An empty city gains us nothing," smiling Baelor growled. He had not smiled since learning that the Hightower vanguard had been destroyed and his brother and many vassals taken captive. "Arthur Snow holds a great many hostages. We must march into the Crimson Mountains and bring them back." "Marching into the Crimson Mountains is more like marching into the 7 hells," Mattis cut in. "Arthur was wise to avoid Earl Paxton at sea, but are we really to abandon our horses and go fight wildlings in the hills?" "Lord Mattis," Baelor said, eyes fixed on Garland. "Earl Quinn Rookton and the knights from Old Town were sent to shield the Riverlands. If we don't rescue them, morale will shatter." "Why won't we try to negotiate a ransom?" Mattis asked, glancing at Garland. "I know Arthur a little. He's not an unreasonable man. Money and terms are better than throwing our soldiers away." At that moment, Sir Oris Oakhart, heir to Old Oak, interjected. "My lords, I hear this whole thing began with pirates striking Starfall's territory. Where does Earl Paxton stand now?" Garland drew breath. His beard trembled with it. "Paxton has consistently denied Arthur Snow's charges. He calls them a pretext for Arthur's aggression." "Let me go," Mattis said. "I have dealings with Arthur. If there's any hope of ransoming the prisoners with acceptable terms, it's better than sending men into the mountains." Silence fell. All eyes turned to Garland to see which path the young commander would choose. Baelor finally spoke. "House Hightower is willing to pay a ransom that will satisfy Arthur, but I doubt I can meet any excessive demands." "Then send Lord Mattis to parley," Garland said. "Find out what Arthur wants." Chapter 196. Count the details. The mountain roads of the Crimson Mountains were far more brutal than Mattis had imagined. Rocky tracks wound like coiled snakes along sheer cliffs. Even with the welcoming party Arthur had sent ahead, ostensibly to find the easier routes, Mattis found the journey punishing. At first, he had assumed he and his 2 attendants would be blindfolded, so they could not remember the way to Eagle Nest Keep. Instead, Xiong Di, who led the party, had only smiled and said, "It doesn't matter if you know the route. Besides, we don't want to carry you." Now the words made sense. Some stretches were barely wide enough for a single person. In such terrain, a squad of archers could make an army pay dearly. Mattis clung to protruding rocks, knuckles white as he picked his way step by precarious step. In hindsight, his decision to halt Baelor's advance and propose negotiations had been a shrewd one. By the time Eagle Nest Keep came into view, his boots were worn through, the soles of his feet burned, and his clothes were soaked with sweat. His 2 attendants were worse off. One was pale, leaning against the rock face and dry heaving, while Xiong Di and the 2 soldiers who had joked all the way there looked unbothered. "You don't look tired at all," Mattis asked during a brief rest on a flat ledge. The Mountain Legion soldiers shrugged. "I was raised here and trained for this. We walk steeper tracks for breakfast. This is nothing." Leaving his attendants to rest, Mattis followed Xiong Di into Eagle Nest Keep and felt his surprise deepen. It was hard to picture such a large settlement in the heart of the Crimson Mountains. If it wasn't quite tens of thousands, it was close. Terraced fields stepped down the mountainsides. At the center rose a group of substantial buildings. If his eyes weren't deceiving him, one was a sept, and he could see people dressed like wildlings praying within. This is real," he murmured, studying the orderly life around him. Women drew water and washed clothes at an oasis. Half-grown children herded goats and mountain ponies. Craftsmen repaired houses and roads. If not for the tattoos and animal skin trimmings, it might have passed for any mountain village. He finally grasped, more clearly than before, the reach Arthur had over the Crimson Mountain wildlings. Arthur's voice cut through his thoughts. The young acting city lord of Starfall, known as the Dawn Sword, stood at the gate with a smile flickering in violet eyes. A servant presented bread and salt with ceremony. The sunlight flashed on the hilt of the great sword, Dawn slung over his shoulder. Mattis bit the bread, tasted the salt, and eyed Arthur. Taller, his beard longer than when they had last met, with an air that made him seem older and more composed. "Lord Arthur." Mattis offered a wry smile. "You've certainly made an impression." Arthur waved him toward the keep's heart. "I had no choice," he said quietly as they walked. "Earl Paxton, to stop the sale of amber peach wine, disguised himself as a pirate, burned my lands, and massacred my people. No lord could let that stand." In the reception hall, a servant set out wine and fruit. Mattis cut to the chase after the brief politeness. "Tell me what you want. Name your price." Arthur leaned back, calm. "By the usual reckoning, a knight's ransom is a few hundred gold dragons. A high lord's ransom is higher." "That's reasonable," Mattis agreed. Arthur shook his head. "I don't want their money for ransom. I am not a kidnapper. My march on Old Hill was never about ransom. It was to make House Redwine answer for their crimes. The people they harmed are not the ones who should pay. I want Redwine to pay for what they did." "Then what are your terms?" Mattis asked. Arthur produced a blank sheet, dipped a quill, and began to write as he spoke. "House Redwine must admit their crimes, hand over the culprits, and compensate me for all losses from their attack. Once they compensate me, I will release all prisoners." Mattis frowned. "And how much are these all losses? Do you have a figure or a basis? Let's work it out." Arthur's pen scratched. "We had an agency agreement. With Peach Garden burned, I cannot fulfill that contract. What was the penalty for breach?" Mattis searched his memory. 50,000 gold dragons, if I recall. Arthur made a flourish. "Make it 100,000. Add the contracts I had with House Tarth and House Fowler. 300,000 in total." Mattis almost choked on his wine. "That's—" "Lord Mattis, I know you are family to Earl Paxton and you worry about relations," Arthur said without looking up. "But when Paxton burned Peach Garden, did he spare your interests?" Mattis's eyes flickered. He closed his mouth and let Arthur continue. Arthur's pen never stopped. He listed losses aloud as he wrote. The peach groves were burned, the winery destroyed, a large stock of amber peach wine in the cellars ruined, reconstruction costs. Peach trees take about 2 years to bear fruit properly. Peach Garden will produce no wine for 2 years. Mobilizing Starfall's levies to seek justice, supplies consumed crossing the Crimson Mountains. Depreciation of weapons and equipment. Compensation for warriors killed in the Riverlands. Losses from the Arbor Fleet's blockade of Starfall's trade. Costs to build watchtowers and lighthouses against the Arbor Fleet. Salaries for hired coastal defenses and cavalry. Providing food and lodging for 800 prisoners, plus musicians, priests, and jailers. Under Mattis's incredulous stare, Arthur filled 3 full pages in 15 minutes. Mattis protested a few of the items on behalf of House Redwine, but the more Arthur detailed, the less he could argue. "Finally," Arthur said, laying down the pen. Mattis felt a lift of hope. "House Redwine must pay 1.5 million gold dragons to cover my losses," Arthur said, inspecting the bill with a hard satisfaction. "And there were 273 of my citizens killed. Blood is not something to be paid away with coin. Murderers must answer with their lives. The survivors must identify the culprits, and those culprits must die." Mattis stared at the staggering sum. "Arthur, this, I'm afraid." Arthur stretched, unruffled. "Those are my terms. If you can get House Redwine to agree, I will begin releasing prisoners." His tone softened a degree. "Since you have come all this way, Lord Mattis, I will not be inflexible. You may choose 70 of the captured hired knights and Old Town City Watch, and 7 of the captured landed knights, 77 men in all, and take them back with this bill. Consider it a gesture of my goodwill." Chapter 197. Mediation from the Iron Throne. Mattis stayed at Eagle Nest Keep for a day. On the second morning he left, leading a long procession, 77 freed captives, and a list of demands Arthur had written out. As Mattis's figure receded down the road, Arthur murmured, "Sir Bard, Do you think 1.5 million gold dragons for House Redwine is too little? Before I went to bed last night, I remembered a few more things I forgot to add, Arthur said. Sir Bard hadn't fully registered the number and blurted, "You're still too merciful. For an insult this big, you should have made those Arbor pirates bleed. Let them learn what happens when they provoke Starfall City." "Yes, Lord Arthur, still too merciful," Crow Eater, standing nearby, added, "and they even got so many captives for free." Arthur smiled thinly. "You think 1.5 million gold dragons is too little? Perhaps I am too kind." "Wait, Arthur, how much did you say?" Sir Bard finally snapped, enunciating each syllable. 1.5 million gold dragons? Crow Eater heard it too. His legs went weak and he collapsed onto the ground. Arthur, walking toward the main keep, glanced back with a look of disdain at the crumpled man and said, "Look at you, all spineless. If I'd asked for 10 million, would you have fainted dead away?" Sir Bard stared at Arthur's retreating back. If the sum was true, the loss was catastrophic. Redwine deserved to be ruined. From the grass, Crow Eater began to slap himself, startling Bard. Bard stepped back. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" "I'm not crazy, old Bard," Crow Eater choked out, tears in his eyes. "I just regret not following Lord Arthur sooner. Now I see why Shigu became a chameleon so early, and why he dragged the whole Stone Sheep tribe with him. There's a future with Lord Arthur." Arthur returned to the reception hall and pulled the copied account statement from a drawer. He had deliberately inflated the demand to 1.5 million gold dragons. Leave plenty of room to negotiate. No one offers their true expectation at first. Money could be bargained, but he would not relent on justice. He intended to make Redwine pay for the blood on their hands. In the days after Mattis left, however, the Riverlands army at Mingguan City went quiet. No movements, no replies. Then a letter with the Iron Throne's seal arrived for Arthur. It ordered the lords of the Riverlands and Dorne to cease hostilities and disband their levied troops within a week. It also summoned the two who had instigated the conflict, Lord Patrek Redwine of Arbor and Sir Arthur Snow, acting City Lord of Starfall City, to King's Landing for questioning and judgment. "Seems the war is over?" Sir Bard said after reading the missive. "Arthur, what do we do?" Arthur's smile was cold. "No, the war isn't over. It's moved to a different place. What else can we do? We obey the Iron Throne, disband the levies, and take the new summons seriously." The Iron Throne's authority was absolute. Its suppression of the Iron Islands rebellion 6 years before still lent weight to its commands. Arthur didn't hesitate. After learning that the Riverlands had disbanded most of their levies at Mingguan City, he ordered Sir Bard to keep a tight watch on the captives, then set off for Starkeep with 2 attendants. He needed to know where Prince Doran stood and to gather the men who would accompany them to King's Landing. At Starkeep, in Arthur's chamber, Name told him, "My uncle means that since it's an order from the Iron Throne, Dorne will comply. He's arranged for Quentin Martell to wait for you on the Stone Road. My cousin will accompany you to King's Landing." Quentin? Arthur was surprised as he stamped the prepared warrants with his seal. Not Ariane? Sending one of Prince Doran's children with Arthur was a show of support. The route also mattered. Prince's Pass runs through the Riverlands, but the Stone Road leads into the Stormlands, an appropriate choice of path. The choice of Quentin over Ariane, though, felt meaningful. Nome's eyes flashed. "Do you think my uncle aims to strip Ariane of her inheritance?" "Not necessarily," Arthur said. He suspected Doran worried that any exposure of Ariane and him together might jeopardize some secret arrangement, perhaps a clandestine marriage pact with Viserys. Nome shook her head. "My uncle's always plotted so Quentin might succeed. He's done things, marrying Ariane off to an old man, the alliances with Ironwood and Illyrian. Ariane has done nothing wrong, yet she might lose her birthright simply for being a woman." Arthur said nothing. He called for Scholar Yi, who was waiting outside, and handed him the sealed documents, orders to disband the levies and summons for the retinue to King's Landing. Scholar Yi bowed and hurried away with them. "Warning you," Name said suddenly, grabbing his collar, her night-dark eyes flashing. "Don't let that Quentin win you over, or you'll regret it." Arthur caught her wrist and with a gentle tug drew her close. "Ariane's far away. Can't you take care of me instead?" His voice dropped, half teasing, half serious. Who knows, once we reach King's Landing, I might end up like my father and grandfather, accused of a crime and have my head cut off. Nomai stiffened for a heartbeat, then relaxed, a smile tugging at her lips. Then I'd be down one lover. Arthur laughed and lifted her in his arms. If that's the case, I'll make sure you have another child. He brushed his lips against her earlobe. The warmth of his breath made her blush. Name, treat tonight as if it's our last. They spent the night together. At noon the next day, Arthur gathered the men who would accompany him to King's Landing. Retinues arriving at Starkeep from Starfall City, all ready. Arthur mounted Zephyr, a horse he hadn't ridden in some time, and set off for the center of power, King's Landing. Compared to the large contingent heading to Sunspear for the tourney, Arthur's party was small, only a dozen or so with him. With him rode Jello, Jimmy, Arthur's two attendants Penrose and Zack, Bishop Alice, several cavalry guards led by Rosso Brunn, and the cook and servants. While Sir William trained conscripts at Starkeep, he had not neglected the road from Starkeep to Prince's Pass. The smooth flagstones sped their march, the horses' hooves rang crisply on the surface, and they reached Euronwood a full 5 days ahead of schedule. The Dornish side of the stone road was guarded by Euronwood's garrison. The road itself began here, running north through Vale City and ending at Summerhall in the Dorne borderlands. Arthur, you are truly worthy of the name Dawn's Sword, Earl Anders of Euronwood told him when he rode up. Anders and Prince Quentyn met him at the city gate and praised his victories in the Riverlands. Anders then arranged a lavish welcome banquet. The feast was held in the castle hall. Candlelight set the silverware to glitter, and roasting meat scented the air. There Arthur saw Ion's Euronwood again, now a married woman, with the soft roundness of pregnancy showing beneath her loose gown. Her husband, Sir Roger Illyrian, sat at her side, refilling her cup and feeding her with attentive hands. The two looked plainly in love. Ions was heir to Euronwood, and Sir Roger the heir to God's grace. Their years might not have matched, but their positions made the match proper. Arthur, tell me about your crossing of the Crimson Mountains and the attack on Mingguan City, Prince Quentyn asked as he sat beside him, seeming resigned to Ions's marriage. Arthur briefly recounted the campaign, how he used the wildlings to harry and draw out the Rockton cavalry, then laid an ambush that destroyed them and captured Earl Quinn Rookton, how he then besieged Mingguan, defeated the Old Hill vassals and Rockton conscripts in detail, and took the city with almost no bloodshed. He left out Sharpwing. Even so, Quentyn and Cletus Euronwood, Earl Anders' eldest son, were stunned. They had thought battle was like a tourney, two sides charging and clashing. They had not appreciated the craft and calculation involved. The banquet lasted from noon well into the night. Later, Arthur stepped onto the castle sky bridge. Nights in Euronwood were cool. The mountain air smelled sweet and clean. From the bridge, he could see a river not far below, running east into the Dorne Sea, a silver thread in the moonlight. The land around the castle was fertile, the forests dense and green, and it was well known that the Euronwoods sat on rich veins of iron, tin, and silver. No wonder the Euronwoods were one of the great houses of Dorne after the Martells, Arthur thought. Anders, he heard, and the Earl approached. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. This view makes the hour pass quickly. Lord Anders, Arthur said, turning. To what do I owe this private word? Call me Anders, the Earl replied, coming to stand beside him. Arthur, what do you think of my daughter? Arthur raised an eyebrow. Lady Ions and Sir Roger are well matched and happily married. I mean my youngest daughter, Gwyneth. During the feast, Arthur had noticed Gwyneth, small, slight, dark-eyed, and brown-haired, a contrast in the blue-eyed, fair-haired Euronwood line. Speak plainly, Arthur said. Anders, the Earl went on, I would arrange a marriage between Gwyneth and Adric Dane. You're bound for King's Landing for your inquiry. Starfall will need allies. If you agree, we can announce the betrothal now. Anders' offer was sincere and timely, an ally for Starfall when Arthur was going to the capital. Arthur was silent for a moment, then shook his head. I appreciate it, Anders, but I must refuse. Anders' brow knit in surprise. May I ask why? I want Edric to choose his own fate, Arthur said, echoing the Red Viper's counsel. He should marry whom he wishes, or, if he chooses not to marry, find his own happiness. There's little enough happiness in the world. Anders gave a small, bitter shake of his head. Many examples show that nobles who pursue free marriages do not fare well. Think on it. Tell me before you leave Euronwood if you change your mind. Arthur did not change his mind. When they left Euronwood, the party had grown to more than 30. They rode north along the Stone Road, stopped at Vale City, and at last, as they were about to leave Bone Road and enter the Dornish borderlands, a troop of cavalry halted them. Sir Cletus's hand went to the hilt of his sword. "Be cautious! Blackport, that's the Dondarrion banner." Blackport, seat of House Dondarrion, lay north of Vale City near the Dornish marches, a strategic choke point guarding Bone Road, a bulwark against Dornish raiders, and a base for clearing out mountain bandits. Arthur raised a hand to still the men. "There's no need. They mean us no harm." A mounted knight rode forward, sun glinting off his armor. "Is this the party of the Dawn Sword, Sir Arthur Snow?" Arthur answered yes. The knight bowed. "My lord Earl Beric has prepared a banquet at Blackport. Please follow me." "My aunt, Illyria Dane, is at Blackport," Arthur told Quentyn and the others. "I let her know we were coming." Quentyn smiled. "A good chance to rest in a castle." Blackport's basalt walls rose dark and severe above a dry moat said to be bottomless. Small and severe compared to the great keeps of the realm, it had nonetheless withstood many assaults by mountain wildlings and Dornish raiders. As Arthur glanced up at the black standard struck by a purple lightning bolt above the tower, he felt a small, odd thrill. His long inactive Three Kingdoms kill panel had just unlocked new cards. Chapter 199. Lightning has a very small chance to electrocute the specified unit. When used on a specified unit, if the unit has recently lied, broken an oath, or violated a sacred vow, the chance and strength of electrocution increase incrementally according to the severity of the lie or oath breaking. So it's an electrical lie detector, huh? An experienced electrician can tell if a bare wire is live just by touching it. Whether someone is lying or not, you'll know if the heavens decide to strike them with lightning. Arthur nearly laughed aloud when he read the stratagem card, Lightning, and its description. He covered it with a few polite coughs. Why had Lightning unlocked after he arrived in Blackport City? The answer came clearly at the banquet that night. Earl Barry stood on a raised platform, a silver-inlaid wineglass in his hand, candlelight flickering over his handsome features. "It was a stormy night," he began. The hall fell silent as he recounted the legendary origin of House Dondarrion. "It was a stormy night. My first ancestor was carrying a message in the Dornish marches when an arrow struck his horse and threw him to the ground. Two Dornish men in ringed armor and winged helmets rushed from the darkness, and my ancestor, having broken his sword in the fall, lay helpless." In a deep, resonant voice, Earl Barry carried the story on as though it were playing before their eyes. Just as the Dornishmen were about to deliver the killing blow, lightning split the sky, bright and searing. A forked bolt struck those two fully armored Dornishmen dead on the spot. My ancestor's message turned the tide, securing the Storm King's victory over Dorne. In gratitude, the king raised him to be the first Earl Dondarrion. He chose a purple forked lightning on a black field studded with stars as his sigil. Arthur noticed Prince Quentyn's fingers white-knuckled around his dining knife and Cletus drinking glumly from a large mug of ale as Earl Barry finished. The Dondarrion origin was well known. Quentyn and Cletus had heard it before, but listening to Earl Barry tell it in person still rankled. House Ironwood, which Cletus belonged to and which guarded the Stone Road, had long had friction with borderland lords. Bound by guest courtesy, Cletus drank his discomfort away at Barry's table. Arthur sipped his wine and watched Earl Barry. Beyond the founding legend, he knew, by things he'd seen and heard, that Earl Barry would die and be resurrected 7 times. The family, and Barry in particular, were almost walking miracles. After a few drinks and polite conversation, Arthur excused himself at Illyria's signal and stepped into the moonlit courtyard. The quiet night was a stark contrast to the noisy hall. Illyria caught his hands and gripped his shoulders, looking him up and down with tears glistening in her eyes. "When I heard about your fight at Old Hill, do you know how worried I was?" she said. "I prayed for you every day in the Sept. Why did you make me stay in Blackport and not come back to Starfall?" Her worry warmed Arthur. While others celebrated his deeds, only his family fretted over whether he'd been hurt. It was the Redwine family, disguised as pirates, who attacked Starfall's waters, he explained patiently. I couldn't strike them openly, so I hit Old Hill to force the issue. The Riverlands and the Arbor Fleet make things complicated. I couldn't risk their besieging Starfall. That's why I told you to stay in Blackport. You see, this city is strong, neutral, and safe enough. And Earl Barry is here. He offered a small, mischievous smile. Illyria flushed, then quickly assumed an aunt's composed expression. Arthur, next time, we can take it to Sunspear or petition the Iron Throne. Don't put yourself in danger again. Aunt, Arthur said, turning serious, some wrongs can be remedied by others, but some must be answered by ourselves. If those who dare to violate Starfall don't pay enough or learn a painful lesson, they'll do it again. Illyria's stern, ant-like face softened. I can't argue with you. She hesitated, then asked, Do you feel ready for the inquiry in King's Landing? Would you like me to go with you? Arthur's chest tightened at the look in her eyes. Having Illyria in King's Landing, a place full of sharp eyes and subtle politics, would likely distract him more than help. He changed the subject with a chuckle. Aunt, how have you and Earl Barry been getting along these past few days? Is he someone you can trust? At the mention of Barry, Illyria brightened and launched into a string of anecdotes. Arthur listened and mentally summarized their relationship as drawn together by circumstance and charm, bound by character. Earl Barry's reputation was earned, one of the few lords who truly lived by knightly codes and cared for common folk, a consistency that somehow persisted even through 7 deaths. They stayed in Blackport 2 more days, while Quentin and Cletus recovered from drinking too much. Then the party of 30 rode north and reached Summerhall in 2 days, the end of the Stone Road. Once a Targaryen summer palace built to commemorate Daeron II's peaceful taking of Dorne, Summerhall had been gutted by a great fire 30 years before. What remained now were ruined walls and desolate, exposed earth, some patches still an unnatural green-black. Bishop Alice stood among the ruins and prayed for the souls of those lost at Summerhall. When he finished, he spoke of the place's grim history. Bright Flame Arion drank wildfire, hoping to become a dragon, and became a corpse. Aegon Futh tried to bring dragons back here, but the wildfire ran out of control and left only ashes. And during Robert's rebellion, Robert won 3 victories in 1 day here, defeating 3 royalist forces and winning the Stormlands. Cletus scoffed. And then Robert went and got routed by Randall Tarley at Ashford. Quentin said nothing. He only stared at the ruins. Jello poured unsweetened lemonade onto the black-green soil and sighed. This is a sad place for the Targaryens. Arthur pulled his gaze away from the wreckage, glanced at his silent system panel, and thought to himself, This is not my lucky place. Chapter 200, Imperial Court Meeting. The king's chair at the Red Keep stood empty, as it so often did. In the small council chamber, Lord John Arryn, Hand of the King, sat at the head of the long table and let his gaze pass over the assembled councillors before he spoke. His Grace is hunting in the Kingswood and will not attend, he announced. Let us begin. They shared a knowing glance. King Robert's absence from small council meetings had long been customary. Maester Pycelle cleared his throat and sorted the letters brought by Raven. His snow-white beard trembled as he spoke. Regarding the conflict between the Riverlands and Dorne, he said, consulting the parchment. Since the royal decree, Highgarden and Sunspear have restrained their vassals and gradually disbanded their levies. The men who instigated this dispute, Earl Paxton Redwine and Sir Arthur Snow, the Dawn Sword, have been summoned and are on their way to King's Landing. My lords, your thoughts? John asked. Renly toyed with a silver goblet, a smile on his lips. I think his Grace went hunting in the Kingswood for want of someone to disobey him. No one to test his hammer on, so he goes off to swing it about the trees instead. Petter Baelish, the Master of Coin, chuckled. Lord Renly is never shy with a jest. It is precisely his Majesty's renown that kept this from turning into a war. If Highgarden and Sunspear had come to blows, the realm would have bled, and the crown's coffers would have been drained. A few more quips were passed back and forth until Stannis Baratheon's face set hard and his jaw ground like stone. John raised a hand for silence. This matter is not over. It is only shelved, not settled. We must handle the two parties properly if this dispute is to be quelled." Stannis's voice was cold and relentless. "The accusations against Earl Paxton Redwyne and Sir Arthur Snow should be investigated thoroughly. If they are guilty, they must be dealt with according to the laws of the realm." "As a Maester, I must offer loyal counsel," Pycelle said, rubbing his ample belly. "For common criminals, justice by the law is right. But when the dispute is between great houses, there must be leniency and mediation. That is how a kingdom keeps peace in the long term." Pater's thin smile faded, and his fingers toyed with his beard. "The Riverlands and Dorne have always been difficult neighbors. In such disputes, one house will be called righteous and the other villain. We should be aiding the righteous." Varys's soft voice slid into the pause. "Lord Pater, which side do you deem righteous?" Pater did not answer directly. "As Master of Coin, I worry about the treasury," he said instead. "We are deeply in debt. A good portion of the crown's income comes from wine tariffs. Arbor's vintages account for much of that. The taxes from Old Town and the sum sent from Highgarden matter as well. Dorne has always negotiated its own contributions. We have only informal oversight there. The point is, the Riverlands' contributions are very important right now." Renly smiled. "Lord Peter fears gold dragons as most fear the gods." Petter rubbed his thumb and forefinger together. "People notice my tricks with coins, but they forget that you need the first 2 dragons before you can make a third appear." Jon Arryn considered that. Petter's words were not without merit. The royal treasury was strained, and the Riverlands' payments were significant. Yet as hand, he must weigh all things impartially. He already knew where Stannis would stand. Renly was close to Highgarden. Rumors clung to Renly and the Knight of 100 Flowers. Petter had made his position clear. Only Varys and Pycelle had been less explicit. Jon turned to the Master of Whisperers. "Lord Varys, do you have anything to add regarding Earl Paxton and Sir Arthur?" Varys inclined his head. "Yes, my lord. My little birds have been busy. A few days before Sir Arthur Snow's lands were assaulted, half of the Arbor fleet put to sea and then vanished. At the same time, Earl Paxton's cousin, Sir Desmond Redwyne, disappeared." Peter's brow tightened. He had expected the facts to favor Highgarden. Varys's intelligence did not. "And Sir Arthur's side?" he asked. Varys's eyes were calm. "Wildlings could not have seized Mingwan City or taken Riverland's lords captive. Sir Arthur did those things himself. Nor is his response without cause. His lands were sacked and property burned. His retaliation could be expected." He paused, letting the council absorb that. "What is more curious is that Sir Arthur has secured control over the wildling bands in the Torrent River region of the Crimson Mountains. He has begun building septs there to spread the worship of the Seven, and the Braemont family, who live upriver, now obey his commands." Peter's expression flickered into suspicion. Varys's account seemed to favor Arthur Snow. Petter could not fathom why the eunuch would take that line when the Riverlands and their allies were so important to the crown. Perhaps Varys had knowledge Petter did not. Jon looked to the last man who had not spoken. "Maester Pycelle, your view on these two?" Pycelle hunched and seemed to grow decades older in a breath. "Bastards are born of desire and deceit," he said in a thin, wavering voice. "The title Dawn Sword, that is an old thing, from the Dawn Age. I cannot say how it applies here. Best, I think, to wait until both parties are in the Red Keep, questioned in person and judged openly." Jon nodded. The council had gathered facts, cast their suspicions, and offered counsel. For now, the suits of armor lining the chamber kept their silence, and the empty king's chair looked on. They would wait for the summons to be answered, for testimonies to be given, and for the law, if not politics, to take its course.